Chapter 5 and 21. Promotion and News. 3 more days slipped away in the blink of an eye. Before Nathan realized it, a full week had passed since they'd carried out the decapitation mission. It was early October now, and as the end of the year approached, even the Fire Country's famously mild climate had grown noticeably cooler, especially along the coast at Eugene Port. That night, deep in the woods just beyond the frontline camp, a lone bonfire crackled, casting wavering shadows on the surrounding pines. Nathan opened his eyes, stirred by a sudden restlessness. He sat up, his gaze sharpening in the firelight. Rising to his feet, he formed the requisite hand seals and gathered chakra. A sizzling crackle split the night air as twin arcs of lightning leapt from his palm, racing toward a nearby tree. The thunderous crack of burning wood followed instantly, filling the clearing with the acrid tang of scorched bark. Nathan let his hand fall, then stepped forward to examine his work. 2 smoldering holes pocked the trunk, faint blue sparks dancing in their depths. A satisfied smile curved his lips. After days of research and relentless training, he had finally synthesized lightning chakra and mastered his first thunder release technique, lightning strike. The raw power still hummed at his fingertips, a thrilling promise of what he could achieve next. As the final sparks from the bonfire drifted skyward, Nathan felt a new confidence settle over him. The war might be far from over, but tonight at least he had proven his own strength. And that strength, he knew, would soon be tested in ways he could not yet imagine. Could you please provide the full chapter text you'd like rewritten? Once I have the complete passage, I can transform it into a polished, coherent English version with Nathan as the protagonist. At that moment, a translucent light blue interface shimmered into view before Nathan's eyes. It laid out his current status in precise detail. Nathan age, 12, physical constitution, 19, spiritual strength, chakra reserves, 41,500, previous, 129,948, now, 124,532. Bloodline traits, Sharingan, Manjekyo Sharingan, 15,088, 50,000, 15,007, 6 50,000. Byakugan unawakened, 16,100. Ninjutsu and skill levels. Chakra refinement technique, level 5, 2,998, 5,000, 3,110, 5,000. Wind release, Rasen Shuriken, level 7, 8,220,000. Wind release, Wind wings, level 5, 3,995 or 5,000, now level 6. 640 10,000. Wind release, Fierce Wind Palm, level 2, 310 500. Fire release, Great Dragon Fire Technique, level 5, 8,005 per 5,000. Fire release, Unburned Scorch Technique, level 4, 1,125 2,000. Level 5, 525 5,000. Water release, Great Shark Bullet Technique, level 6, 4,244 10,000, 6,900 10,000. Water release, Water Wave, level 3, 60,000. Water release, Water Array Pillar, level 2, 400 500. Water release, Water Break Wave, level 1, 200. Earth release, Hardening Technique, level 6, 2,200 10,000, 5,700 10,000. Earth release, Earth Flow Wall, level 4, 750 2,000. Lightning release, Lightning Strike, level 1, 200. Lightning release, Newly Learned Lightning Body, level 1, 100. Shadow Clone Technique, level 5, 4,109 and 5,000, level 6, 6,100 and 10,000. Shuriken Shadow Clone Technique, level 0, 45,100. Chakra Absorption Technique, level 6, 4,400 10,000, 4,500 10,000. Rasengan, level 7, 14,010 20,000, 15,900 20,000. Palm Immortal Technique, level 8, 40,200 50,000, 41,880 50,000. Chakra Scalpel, level 6, 9,200 10,000. Skin Extraction Technique, level 6, 3,100 10,000. Reflection of the Heart Technique, level 8, 19,715 50,000, 21,059 50,000. Chakra Control, level 6, 1,000 10,000, 1,300 10,000. Guardian Seal, level 5, 10 5,000, 306 to 5,000. Sealing Array, level 3, 21,000, 300 1,000. Perfect Skills, None unlocked. As the display faded, Nathan realized not only had he acquired Lightning Release, Lightning Strike, but he'd also just unlocked a brand new Lightning Release technique, Lightning Body. Nathan had received 2 Lightning Release techniques from his clan, along with the Lightning Chakra training notes. One of these jutsu was designed to sharpen the body's reflexes by stimulating the muscles with electricity. Naturally, it demanded nothing less than hands-on, full-body practice, time Nathan simply didn't have. After only partial effort, he'd reached 15 out of 100 on its level scale. He reluctantly set it aside. In the same vein, Nathan suspended all other jutsu that rely on heavy chakra supplementation. Wind Release, Fierce Wind Palm, Fire Release, Great Dragonfire Technique, Water Release, Water Chaos Wave, Water Release, Water Array Wall, Water Release, Water Breakwave, which he had only just begun. Over the past few days, he'd occasionally ventured into the wilds around Eugenport, hunting rogue mist ninja to siphon their chakra. Yet every drop went straight into mastering the Shuriken Shadow Clone technique and the Chakra Feather Garment. With no chakra to spare, these other skills had no choice but to remain on hold, at least for now. Nathan's gamble had paid off. In just 3 days, he'd imprinted both the Shuriken Shadow Clone technique and the Chakra Feather Robe onto his skill panel, even if he hadn't quite mastered them yet. From here on, true mastery was only a matter of time. He'd expected the process to take far longer, but he discovered that with ample chakra, he could accelerate his progress. And each new technique he learned made the next one easier to conquer. That very principle explained how he'd managed to catalog 2 advanced skills in such record time. Now, as he surveyed the panel and imagined the power at his fingertips, Nathan toyed with the idea of venturing deeper into the wilderness to hunt more mist ninja and gather experience. After turning the thought over in his mind, however, he set it aside. There simply wasn't any urgent reason to press on, at least not yet. Nathan hovered above the darkened camp, wind currents rippling beneath him as he finished mastering his wind-style wind wings technique. A week ago, the Mist Ninja at Eugenport had finally repaired their command grid and were growing restless again. Nathan wasn't intimidated by the prospect of facing them in battle, but he also knew better than to rush headlong into a fight. Provoking the enemy into striking first would only waste his time. It was far wiser to strengthen his skills before any confrontation. Satisfied with today's training, he retracted his chakra wings and drifted toward his tent. He yawned, stretched his arms, and snapped the portable control panel shut, snuffing out the small campfire where he'd been poring over battle charts. His muscles tingled pleasantly from the day's exercises. Rest was well-deserved. As he touched down on the soft earth, however, something felt off. Normally, at this hour, well past midnight, the camp fell silent, save for the patrolling guards. Everyone else would be tucked in their tents, asleep. But tonight, faint lantern light and murmured voices drifted on the breeze. Nathan paused at the entrance to the main clearing. Nearly every shinobi in camp stood gathered around a tall, crackling bonfire. Their faces, lit by dancing flames, shone with excitement. Laughter erupted as they exchanged stories, and the air thrummed with energy. It was as though a great victory had just been won, or some long-awaited announcement made. Curious, Nathan stepped forward across the loose stones of the fire ring. A few of his comrades turned when he appeared, beckoning him over with grins. Whatever news they'd received, it was clear tonight would not be an ordinary night of rest. And Nathan, too, was about to learn what had everyone celebrating under the stars. Nathan frowned, about to call for someone, when Kobayashi Shunji appeared, practically bursting with excitement. "Captain, Sunagakure has surrendered." "What?" Nathan's voice caught in his throat. "Really," Shunji said, eyes shining. "The Sand Village just capitulated. Our war with them is over." "When did this happen?" Nathan demanded. "We received word from headquarters only moments ago," Shunji replied. Nathan drew in a slow breath, disbelief and relief warring on his features. After a long, quiet moment, he murmured, "Finally, it's over." To Nathan, the peace between Konoha and the Sand Village was the first sign that the great ninja war might soon end. But he also knew what came next. Kirigakure would almost certainly strike back, and they had to be ready. Chapter 522, Aftermath. Nathan sat quietly, his jaw tight and eyes focused on some distant point. Lieutenant Kobayashi Shunji shifted uneasily before finally asking, "Captain, is everything all right?" Nathan blinked, then waved him off with a small, reassuring smile. "It's nothing," he said. In truth, he knew exactly what was brewing. Once the news reached Kirigakure village, they would surely respond, and not kindly. Iwagakure in the rain, already locked in a bitter struggle with Konoha, and Kumogakure on the opposite front would almost certainly react as well. But so what? The momentum in the shinobi world was now building toward peace. More than 2 years, almost 3 of constant warfare had left everyone, civilians and shinobi alike, exhausted. Even if the elders of those villages still held grudges, public wariness would check their ambitions. Besides, Konoha had powerful allies ready to shore it up if it stumbled. Any diplomatic fallout or military reprisals would be addressed by the Hokage and the village council. As a jonin, Nathan reminded himself, his duty was to stay focused on his mission, not to lose sleep over politics. That thought settled over him like a cool breeze. Tension drained from his shoulders, and he felt the knots in his chest unwind. Whatever came next, he was ready. Nathan ordered Kobayashi Shunji to lay in tonight's patrols and not to let his guard down. With that, he headed back to his quarters and, ignoring the distant laughter and music of the village festivities, collapsed onto his cot. He was asleep before his head even touched the pillow. At first light the next morning, Nathan awoke, washed quickly, and set his subordinates to their day's tasks. He was about to slip off to the training grounds when a breathless Chunin messenger arrived at the edge of his camp. Startled, Nathan braced for an urgent crisis. Sure, his training schedule would be ruined. Instead, the messenger pressed a sealed, confidential scroll into his hands. Slicing it open, Nathan's tension began to ebb as he read. The scroll carried 2 critical announcements. First, it confirmed that emissaries from the village and the Sand Village had reached a preliminary accord. The senior leaders on both sides planned to sign a formal peace treaty within the next day or 2. Second, it summoned Nathan back to the Fire Village at once for a briefing on security arrangements for the impending peace celebrations. Nathan tucked the scroll into his belt, a real truce at last, and new orders that could pull him straight out of the field. He squared his shoulders. There would be time to train later. Right now, the future of 2 entire villages depended on his swift return. Nathan received word that reinforcements from the Sand Village's frontline units would arrive within a week at the earliest, or 2 weeks at the latest. In the meantime, he'd been ordered to watch for any Kirigakure counterattacks. He wasn't especially worried. He and his squad weren't the only Konoha Ninobi near Yujin Port. In fact, fully 80% of Konoha's forces on this front were deployed here. Dozens of sensory specialists maintained constant vigilance, their Byakugan-like vision trained on the port. Whatever moves the enemy made, they'd spot it immediately. What Nathan really focused on was the incoming support. Once those troops arrived, he could leave this grinding battlefield behind and head back to one of the more comfortable strongholds, either Blackstone or Eagle Cliff. He preferred those postings. There were far fewer shinobi with exotic Kekkei Genkai, so missions ran more smoothly and with far fewer complications. Nathan eyed the weaker enemy forces in the distance, ideal targets for chakra harvesting. Many of his advanced techniques demanded outside chakra to reach their full potential, and these understaffed units would provide ample supply. Of course, he still needed to wait for the support troops to arrive and for Nara Chiguang's deployment orders. There was no point in dwelling on it now. Tucking the sealed message back into his cloak, Nathan addressed the Chunin messenger standing before him. "I've received the report. You may return and relay the confirmation." The young Chunin snapped to attention. "Yes, Captain Nathan." With a swift hand seal, he vanished in a blur of light, leaving only a faint ripple in the air. Nathan watched the shimmer fade, then turned to go. After 2 steps, though, he stopped and pivoted back toward the camp's center. Word of a possible ceasefire had been circulating as rumor, but now that he held the official notice, he owed it to his comrades to set the record straight. He paused on a low ridge overlooking the gathered shinobi. Inwardly, he wondered how they would react. Would the promise of peace lift their spirits or leave them restless for action? He couldn't be sure. In that moment, Nathan realized he had still underestimated Konoha's deep longing for harmony. Nathan's announcement rippled through the camp like a sudden gust of wind, exactly as he had anticipated. As the warriors erupted into excited chatter, he offered a firm nod and reminded them to stay on high alert. Then, without another word, he slipped away from the gathering and made his way back into the dense forest to resume his training. 4 days passed in the silent company of the trees and the steady rhythm of his exercises. On the morning of the 5th day, Nathan was deep in practice beneath a canopy of fading sunlight when a sharp cry split the air. He froze, muscles tensing, and looked up to see a great eagle wheeling overhead, its cry echoing through the branches. The bird circled Nathan 2 more times, each call growing more urgent, before it angled downward in a swift dive and landed lightly a few feet away. Nathan's heart skipped. This was no random forest creature. It was the summoned beast of one of his chunin, a trusted messenger between him and the camp. The eagle would not have disturbed him unless the message was urgent, and in light of the recent uneasy atmosphere, he already guessed the news it bore must be grave. He drew a steadying breath and crouched to meet the bird's gaze, bracing himself for whatever crisis had arisen back at camp. Without hesitating, Nathan seized the messenger hawk and untied the scroll fastened to its leg. He unfurled the parchment and read the terse warning, "Mist ninja are attacking. Return immediately." At those 6 words, a knowing smile curved his lips. Ever since word spread of the truce between Konoha and the Sand Village, the Mist operatives in Abaratsu port had been restless, and when both sides finally signed the peace treaty 2 days ago, their agitation only grew. Nathan had been certain an attack was coming, and now his prediction had been confirmed. Still, he felt no panic. With his current abilities, even if Konoha fell, the Mist forces would be powerless against him. So why worry? In fact, Nathan saw this incursion as an opportunity. Many of his newly acquired skills were now thirsting for chakra, and what better battlefield to test them than this one? Nathan knew he couldn't perfect every skill in one go. That was wishful thinking, but boosting 1 or 2 levels was within reach. Wasting no time, he released the eagle from his arm and activated the shadow clone technique. In an instant, every clone training in the surrounding forest dissolved, their accumulated memories and experiences pouring back into his mind. Nathan closed his eyes and methodically absorbed the torrent of data, converting each fragment into raw proficiency. When the process was complete, he channeled his renewed power into 2 techniques: wind style, wind wings, and chakra feather garb. With a sudden whoosh of air, he soared off toward the camp at breathtaking speed. Chapter 523, Fishing in Troubled Waters. Ding! Ding ding! Boom! The distant echoes of battle rattled the air. The Mist Ninja's counterattack was swifter and more brutal than Nathan had anticipated. In the few minutes it took him to return to the forward camp, fighting around Yujin Port had already broken out. Hovering above the scene, Nathan surveyed the horizon. Towering flames, spirals of smoke, and the thunderous blasts of detonating talismans. There was no mistaking it. The Mist Ninja assault was in full force. He could almost hear the commanders calling for reinforcements. After all, that urgent recall was precisely why he'd been sent back. Shaking off any lingering doubts, Nathan completed a quick reconnaissance circle and then dove straight into the encampment. The troops below let out relieved cheers at his arrival. Touching down beside Kobayashi Shunji and the others, he issued orders with practiced efficiency. "Take your positions and stand by for my command," he said. Then, bracing himself, Nathan stepped back to await the order that would send them charging into the fray. Nathan didn't have to wait long for Nara Kiyoshi's transfer orders. As he'd half expected, the message was simple: take his squad to the front lines, reinforce their comrades, and halt the Mist Ninja's counterattack. Without a word of hesitation, Nathan rallied his men, broke camp, and set out at a run. By the time they arrived, the battlefield was already in disarray. Under the Mist Ninja's relentless assault, Konoha's forward units were hard-pressed, the air thick with dust, smoke, and the clang of clashing blades. Yet the Hidden Leaf was far from unprepared. Ever since the conflict began 10 days ago, they'd kept every guard on high alert. No sooner had they detected the Mist's latest movement than they funneled fresh troops to the threatened sector. Now both sides were locked in brutal combat within a cramped zone just 5 kilometers west of Eugene Port. With so many shinobi packed into such a small area, every exchange of blows and jutsu blast came at a terrible cost. Casualties were mounting on both sides faster than commanders could count. Nathan took a steadying breath. There was no time for hesitation here, only for action. He raised his voice to issue orders, his eyes sweeping the field. If they were to turn the tide, it would be now. Neither side was willing to back down. The Kirigakure troops, sensing the arrival of Konoha's reinforcements, pressed their attack. If they could seize more ground now, even pending peace talks would favor them. For Konoha, the stakes were equally high. Their recent negotiations with the Sand Village had yielded almost nothing, and losing any more territory here would render Lord Hokage Sarutobi Hiruzen's diplomatic efforts moot. Every shinobi from Konoha understood that ceding land meant abandoning any hope of a peaceful resolution. They dug in their heels, determined to deny Kirigakure another bargaining chip. Nathan reviewed the situation in his mind. He knew that his own will alone wouldn't turn the tide of this conflict, and frankly, he had no desire to interfere with decisions made by the High Command. This was their war, their choice. Instead, he decided to make the most of the chaos, hoping to gather as much chakra as he could in the heat of battle. With that resolve, he completed the handover with the Jonin commanders stationed at the front and led his squad into the fray. Nathan felt the familiar pulsing of chakra in his body. It was still only noon, far too early for him to train his shadow clone technique, and his chakra network was already operating at full throttle. In this state, he couldn't absorb any more chakra. To make matters worse, his hectic schedule had left him no time or energy to develop a sealing jutsu that might store surplus chakra. No matter how many mist shinobi he encountered, without additional containers, he simply couldn't draw in more energy. Nathan frowned and muttered to himself, "There's only one stupid way around this." Steeling himself, he swiftly formed hand seals for his signature technique. With a sudden crack and a swirl of smoke, 3 perfect replicas of Nathan materialized at his side. He planned to turn these shadow clones into makeshift chakra batteries. He'd already tested the idea in the field. While each clone could only hold around 60 to 70% of his normal capacity, that was still better than nothing. By siphoning extra chakra into them, he solved the container problem, at least for now. He just had to figure out a way to keep the clones from drawing unwanted attention. Nathan closed his eyes and activated the mind link technique, instantly connecting with his 3 shadow clones. In a calm mental voice, he ordered, "Disguise yourselves." Without hesitation, each clone formed the required hand seals and wove the transformation jutsu. With a flash of light, the 3 figures shifted seamlessly into the guises of ordinary Konoha shinobi. Nathan didn't bother hiding his chakra absorption ability. Many in the Leaf already knew of it. What he feared was attention from the Mist's operatives. If they realized someone was draining chakra left and right, they'd come knocking for notoriety or profit. He wasn't concerned for himself, but he didn't want his clones embroiled in a Mist vendetta. Better, he thought, for them to pass now as nothing more than a routine reconnaissance team from Konoha. Nathan studied the aftermath of his recent upgrade to the shadow clone technique. Level 6 had certainly made his clones sturdier and more reliable, but they still fell far short of the real thing. The moment an enemy zeroed in on one, it shattered under pressure. He hated having to replenish his ranks mid-battle. Beyond the heavy chakra cost, the seconds spent reforming clones could be the difference between victory and defeat. If he could avoid that delay, he would. Disregarding his squad's curious glances, Nathan flicked his wrist and dispelled the 3 shadow clones at his side. Then he led his team forward into the heart of the conflict. Within moments, chaos erupted all around. Steel clashed, chakra flared, and clouds of mist swirled with shuriken in flight. There was no time for hesitation. Nathan plunged into combat against a formidable mist ninja, weaving through a hail of attacks. At the same time, he activated his mind-connecting technique to keep tabs on his lone remaining clone, which was locked in a separate skirmish just beyond the mist. In the pandemonium of battle, he reminded himself, one found the best openings. Like fishing in troubled waters, where every ripple could conceal a prize. Within minutes, Nathan's 3 shadow clones seized their chance and siphoned chakra from 2 mist ninjas, netting nearly 10,000 points. That alone would soon allow Nathan's body to accommodate the extra reserves. Seizing the moment, he signaled his clones to do more than just absorb chakra. They were to engage the enemy with the very ninjutsu they still needed to master. In doing so, they'd both hone their skills and expend chakra, only to replenish it moments later, turning training and energy acquisition into a single, efficient operation. Any chakra the clones expended in combat was effectively free, so Nathan had no qualms about the plan. Almost at once, the clones struck a perfect balance between chakra intake and expenditure. Their techniques grew markedly sharper, the invisible progress manifesting in subtle, controlled movements. Nathan allowed himself a relieved grin. Just then, 2 mist ninjas emerged from the gathering mist and strode toward him. Though Nathan had yet to distinguish himself spectacularly, it was clear the mist village had taken notice, and now they were coming to investigate. Nathan winced. This was the price of having a reputation. 2 attackers were barreling straight toward him, but he breathed a quiet sigh of relief. He'd already dispatched 3 shadow clones as decoys. Without them drawing the enemy's attention, he'd have been trapped and likely killed. Chapter 524, Truce. The wind sang past their scarves. Swoosh! Swoosh! Before Nathan could even draw his breath, 2 masked shinobi of the Mist Village leapt from the shadows, hurling kunai aimed straight at his heart and throat. Nathan didn't flinch. With a single, sharp glance, he tracked both throwing knives in midair, then spun around, propelling 2 kunai of his own in a perfect backhand toss to intercept them. Heads up, he warned, calling out to Kobayashi Shunji and the other Konoha Special Jonin, who were locked in combat just yards away. Kobayashi and his partner barely had time to nod. Engaged by a half-dozen mist operatives on their flank, they couldn't spare more than an instant's notice, but they trusted Nathan. His record in the field was impeccable, and everyone knew it. If a mission hinged on neutralizing these 2 mist attackers, Nathan was the man for the job. With the warning delivered, Nathan activated his instant sword technique. In the blink of an eye, his form became a streak of emerald light as he charged the 2 mist ninja. Caught off guard by his blurring advance, the pair scrambled to defend themselves. But Nathan's speed was overwhelming. He closed the gap before they even had time to brace. Meanwhile, Kobayashi and the other Jonin steadied themselves, preparing to back him up if needed. Despite the pressure of their own skirmish, they felt no doubt. Nathan would handle these 2, and together they'd force the Mist Village into the truce they sought. Nathan felt the tension ease the moment he realized he wasn't facing a do-or-die duel. 2 genuine Jonin stood before him, but neither was pressing for a lethal strike. If he weren't their target, letting them loose on his allies would be disastrous. But happily, their hesitation told another story. He paid no mind to the whispers behind him. What the onlookers thought didn't concern him. Only the 2 Jonin mattered. How long would it take to defeat them? This wasn't mere cockiness, it was confidence backed by his proven strength. 2 Jonin, even one from the fearsome Kaguya clan, posed no real threat. Nathan's power on display during the Yujin port raid already outclassed theirs, and he hadn't even been going all out. Still, he needed to conceal just how restrained he was. A blatant display of dominance would raise questions among his comrades, but the wary glances and guarded stances of the Mist Shinobi told him they weren't here to kill him, just to test his skill. An unspoken agreement formed in that instant. They would spar, not slaughter. Perfect. Nathan's training plan for the day was far from complete, and what better way to sharpen his abilities than by trading blows with 2 Jonin? He inhaled deeply, centered himself, and readied for the real fight to begin. Thoughts raced through Nathan's mind as he closed the distance to the Hyuga clan veteran, long sword raised. A sharp clang rang out as his blade met a ragged ridge of bone spurs jutting from the shinobi's forearm, spurs that had torn clean through flesh. Sparks erupted, but the veteran stood unfazed. A grim chuckle escaped the Hyuga ninja's lips. "You think that's enough?" he taunted, his voice echoing across the clearing. With a forceful exhale, he activated his corpse bone vein. Jagged spines burst from every part of his body until he looked like a living hedgehog. In the next instant, he flowed into a succession of Hyuga clan taijutsu techniques, each strike more precise and powerful than the last. Nathan's 3 Magatama Sharingan flared to life, every movement frozen and analyzed in his vision. He slipped and weaved through the onslaught, every dodge conserving strength for a decisive return blow. But the veteran pressed on relentlessly, bone spikes swinging in broad arcs that splintered the earth at Nathan's feet. At the fringe of the battlefield, another shinobi cloaked in mist stood ready. He prowled the perimeter, eyes sharp for an opening. When he saw one, he would rain shuriken or unleash a potent ninjutsu to tip the scales. For now, Nathan remained locked in deadle. Why exchange? Each breath measured, each heartbeat a countdown to the fight's turning point. Nathan slipped into formation alongside a Hyuga Jonin, ensuring the veteran stayed focused on him rather than turning his Byakugan glare on the other mist shinobi. Perfect. That diversion bought Nathan exactly the cover he'd been angling for. While his 2 opponents poured all their attention into containing him, he used the fierce exchange to sharpen his own jutsu, slotting in one new technique after another. Minute by minute, the fight looked brutal, but in truth, each warrior was conserving his true strength for a decisive move. Nathan alone was juggling half a dozen surprise tricks, maybe more, tucked away for the final blow. Even so, neither mist ninja could keep pace. A Jonin-level duel sapped chakra with brutal efficiency, and it was clear they'd miscalculated their reserves against Nathan's relentless drive. That said, Nathan hadn't come in underpowered. Before the battle even began, he'd siphoned chakra from a handful of captured mist operatives, enough to refill what his shadow clones would soon expend. Had he entered with only a quarter of his usual supply, this duel might already be lost. Now, with both opponents teetering on the edge of collapse, Nathan readied himself to strike. One flawless jutsu, and the battle would be his. At that moment, 2 more Kirigakure Jonin, both special Jonin, rushed in to reinforce their comrades, immediately relieving much of the pressure on the field. Nathan could only watch, powerless to stop this deadly game from dragging on. In what felt like the blink of an eye, afternoon gave way to evening. The sun sank below the horizon, the moon climbed into the sky, and night settled across the land. Then a thunder of fireworks exploded toward Yujin Port, the unmistakable signal for Kirigakure's forces to withdraw. Almost instantly, the shinobi broke formation and retreated in disciplined ranks. Even the 3rd squad facing Nathan obeyed the order and began to fall back. He had considered holding them in place to buy time and restore his chakra, but a glance at the regrouping Jonin in the distance convinced him to abandon the idea. In just a few hours, he'd slain a Jonin and a special Jonin and left 2 others gravely wounded. That was more than enough. Better to end the fight now and reflect on the lessons his shadow clones had learned. Nathan stood silently, watching the Kirigakure Jonin disappear into the distance. He refused to act on impulse. Instead, he waited until they were safely out of sight before returning to the temporary base. There, he reviewed the mission's casualties, issued orders to regroup and tend to the wounded, and finally slipped away to a quiet corner. He closed his eyes and formed the familiar seals. Shadow clone technique. In an instant, 3 shadowy figures dissolved into nothingness, and the battlefield's energy surged back into his body. Memories, sensations, and raw combat experience flooded his mind. Despite his unusually high spiritual resilience, he'd pushed that attribute to 20. Nathan staggered under the sheer weight of it all. He pressed his fingertips to his temples, fighting off the onslaught of foreign thoughts. He forced himself to breathe steadily, sorting through the torrent of newly acquired knowledge. Between the 3 clones, they had expended roughly 250,000 chakra in the span of the battle, each skill leaving its own imprint on Nathan's consciousness. He could feel the ebb and flow of water style, water wave, and water array pillar, the gusting pressure of wind style, fierce wind palm, the solid grounding of earth style, earth flow wall, and the sharp sting of lightning style, lightning strike. As the chaos of their techniques settled into his awareness, Nathan realized there were still more skills waiting to be absorbed. He closed his eyes once more, braced himself, and prepared to integrate the rest of the lessons his clones had sacrificed themselves to gain. None of Nathan's advanced techniques, fire style, Great Dragon Fire technique, Wade, R style, water break wave, shuriken shadow clone technique, or chakra feather robe were suitable for public display. The Great Dragon Fire technique, after all, is a forbidden Uchiha secret, far rarer than the common fire-style Great Fireball technique. Deploying a shadow clone to cast it would instantly draw unwanted attention. Likewise, the Water Break Wave is a high-grade jutsu Nathan obtained only with great effort and merit from the village. An unknown shinobi brandishing such a skill would spark immediate suspicion. He resolved to shelve both for now. As for the shuriken shadow clone technique and chakra feather robe, although Nathan intended to master them eventually, practicing them with a clone at this point would still point back to him, and while the risk wasn't fatal, it was unnecessary trouble. To stay under the radar, he refused to let the shadow clone run through those drills. That left just one technique remaining: lightning release, lightning body. Nathan studied the lightning release body flicker technique, a jutsu that channels electric currents through the muscles to boost speed. Naturally, it required a real physical body. Shadow clones, despite their name, were nothing more than condensed chakra, so they simply couldn't handle this technique. In the end, Nathan's clone managed to practice only a basic, commonplace ninjutsu. But that was enough. If he didn't sink chakra into these fundamentals now, he had no guarantee of improving them later. It made far more sense to lay the groundwork immediately. After all, even the most ordinary techniques can become formidable at advanced levels. By investing in them early, Nathan would not only learn and refine new skills more rapidly, but also enrich his combat arsenal. In short, committing effort to these basic jutsu now was a wise and worthwhile decision. Chapter 525, Support Arrives. Nathan shook off his stray thoughts and concentrated on turning his recent training sessions into genuine skill mastery. He sank into a meditative state, mentally replaying every subtle movement and strategic choice he'd made. Normally, he would use the shadow clone technique to reset his clones and start fresh, but since he hadn't released the jutsu this time, the clone's condition slowly degraded. As a result, each new session of practice yielded diminishing returns. By the end, he found that the same amount of chakra now only translated into about half the proficiency he used to achieve. A wave of frustration washed over him. Determined not to let his progress stall, Nathan made a plan. Beginning tomorrow, he would spend time after each round of shadow clone training to consolidate and internalize everything he'd learned. Then he would release and recreate his clones so they'd always be at peak condition. Even if he couldn't manage his usual hourly intervals, he would keep the gaps as short as possible. Otherwise, the efficiency loss would be too steep, and he refused to let his hard work slip away. Nathan reviewed the mastery levels of his various skills on the cultivation panel, then set the readings aside. It was time to train. He focused on the Palm Immortal technique first, then shifted seamlessly into the Reflection Heart technique. There were still hours of practice left before he could afford any rest. Morning arrived in a flash. Nathan, who had managed only a few hours of sleep, was abruptly roused by a thunderous explosion. He snapped awake, sat up for a heartbeat, then leapt to his feet. With a deft hand seal, he channeled chakra and unleashed his ninjutsu. Wind style, wings of wind. A pair of pale blue chakra wings erupted from his back. Nathan beat them once and launched himself skyward. From this vantage point, he scanned the horizon. Kirigakure's forces were attacking again. Explosions bloomed across the field, growing in frequency and intensity. After a moment's observation, he dove back toward the temporary base. By the time he landed, every allied shinobi was on their feet, eyes blazing with readiness against the next assault. Nathan stood before his squad, meeting their anxious eyes without a word of small talk. He cut straight to the point. The Kirigakure forces have attacked again. Gear up and take your ration pills. There's no time for cooking. The shinobi hurried to secure their equipment and swallow the synthetic meal capsules, gripped by both haste and tension. 15 minutes later, a group of Jonin commanders arrived bearing fresh orders. Nathan's unit was to redeploy immediately and defend the northern flank, plugging any gap the mist ninjas might exploit. Saluting crisply, Nathan acknowledged the directive and led his team into motion. Not far from the new position, Nathan halted and drew a deep breath. In a swirl of chakra, he split into 3 perfect replicas. Without hesitation, one clone wove the transformation technique, assuming Nathan's appearance, and slipped away from the main column. The real Nathan and the remaining clone pressed on with the others, leaving the decoy to carry out its secret mission. A few Konoha shinobi glanced after the departing figure with curiosity, but no one dared pry. Nathan's loyalty was above question, and some mysteries were better left untouched. Nathan's men knew better than to pry into their commander's secrets. One misstep, and it might as well be a death sentence. With a decisive life-or-death engagement looming, there was no time for idle curiosity. Survival was their only concern. The war's end was in sight, and none wished to perish before the sun rose. 30 minutes later, the battle erupted, but only a handful of mist ninjas struck their line. The meager assault brought a collective sigh of relief among the defenders, and even Nathan allowed himself a faint smile. Fewer enemies meant a simpler operation, and far more opportunities for him to draw on his shadow clone's combat memories and training experience. Each time he absorbed those echoes of their practice, he could immediately refresh his clone's status. All morning, events unfolded exactly as Nathan had calculated. By resetting his clone's parameters every hour, he kept them at peak readiness, ensuring their training remained intensely efficient. But when afternoon arrived, the tide of conflict shifted in ways no one had anticipated. For reasons still unclear, a weak point in our front lines opened overnight, and before anyone could react, a swarm of mist ninjas poured through. Nathan found himself suddenly surrounded and under intense pressure. He had to draw on every ounce of his strength to hold off 4 of them at once, landing a crippling strike on one and wounding the rest, until reinforcements finally arrived. Had he faltered for even a moment, our entire defense would have collapsed. There was a silver lining. After suffering heavy losses, the mist ninjas withdrew in retreat, granting Nathan precious breathing room to train and recover. But over the next few days, 2 more assaults came, each one more dangerous than the last. Only after the war did Nathan learn the root cause of these relentless attacks. Several key outposts in our defensive network had been silently overrun, opening the way for the enemy. In the end, we forced the mist ninjas all the way back to Yujin Port, though it was clear our forces were stretched to their limit. Thankfully, the worst never came. 5 days later, the first wave of reinforcements from the Sand Village finally reached the front lines. Though small in number, their arrival injected fresh hope into the Konoha forces. Morale spiked, and the defenders found the strength to stand firm. Even as the mist ninjas redoubled their assaults the next day, Konoha's shinobi held their ground with renewed determination. When night fell and the fighting paused, Nathan slipped into the makeshift field hospital behind the lines. With calm efficiency, he set to work, treating the wounded. He'd taken on the role of medical ninja here before. 3 days earlier, when the Mist's offensive had grown fiercer, he'd been reassigned to help manage the ever-increasing tide of casualties. He welcomed the chance. Every shift honed his command of medical ninjutsu, especially his precision with the so-called palm fairy technique. From that moment on, Nathan carved out time each night to serve as a guest medic. Though he volunteered only temporarily, his skill and composure left a lasting impression on both the injured and those who cared for them. In the dim light of the field hospital, his hands worked miracles. One more reason for the men and women of Konoha to believe they might yet see victory. In the makeshift infirmary at Yujin Port, Nathan methodically cleaned and dressed a fellow shinobi's blood-soaked wound. The harsh glare of the overhead lights made every crimson drop stand out, but he'd long since grown accustomed to the sight. Through the open flap of the tent, muted thunder rolled across the battlefield. Reinforcements from Sunagakure were finally trickling in. With their arrival, Konoha's hold on the front would only strengthen. Earlier today, Kirigakure had struck 4 separate points along Konoha's defenses, but this coastal sector bore the brunt of their assault. The other 3 breaches, weakly held by smaller Kirigakure units, were unlikely to last. Nathan knew the Konoha High Command would first rush to seal those gaps, then concentrate every available force here at Yujin Port. Once the last Kirigakure ninja was driven back, negotiations would follow. It was a familiar cycle of advance, counterattack, an uneasy truce. A cycle Nathan had no interest in seeing unfold again. All he truly cared about was when he'd finally be transferred away from this war-torn shoreline. He paused for a moment, needle in hand, and glanced toward the tent's entrance, hoping that tomorrow's orders might at last set him on a different path. Keeping Nathan from transferring was virtually impossible. Whenever Konoha's senior command decided to retake the other strongholds, they invariably sent reinforcements, and Shinobi, who had originally served in those regions, were given top priority. It was almost certain Nathan would be reassigned back to his old unit, and even if that didn't happen automatically, he could simply submit a transfer request himself. Nara Kiyomitsu would hardly refuse a volunteer so eager to help. Chapter 526, Transfer Orders and Harvest, 2-in-1. The unfolding of events went exactly as Nathan had predicted. With the arrival of Konoha's second and third support contingents, freshly deployed from the Sand Village front, the Kirigakure forces found their counterattacks faltering. Their footholds contracted day by day until, 5 days later, the battlefield lay decisively in Allied hands. At last, Nathan received the transfer orders he'd been waiting for. He reported to the rear command center the following morning. Inside a stark, dimly lit office, Captain Nara Chiguang unrolled a sealed parchment and slid it across the desk. "Nathan," the captain said without preamble, "you depart at first light tomorrow. The support troops will finish assembling tonight. Make sure you reach the Blackstone stronghold by midday." "Yes, Captain," Nathan replied crisply, accepting the scroll. Chiguang offered no further instructions. With a dismissive wave, he sent Nathan on his way. Stepping out into the corridor, Nathan paused. A transfer order might sound routine, but he knew better. Something about this assignment felt different, heavier than a simple redeployment. He slipped the parchment into his pack and set off to prepare, resolve hardening in his chest. Whatever lay ahead at Blackstone Stronghold, Nathan was ready. As soon as the front lines here steadied, Nara Chiguang ordered Nathan to reinforce the Blackstone Stronghold and even peeled off more troops for the assignment. Support from the Sand Country had helped shore up their numbers, but forces were still stretched perilously thin. So for headquarters to siphon off additional units spoke volumes about how desperate the situation had become. Chiguang offered no further explanation, however, and Nathan could sense there was more behind the order, some piece of intelligence, hazy at best, that had practically forced their hand. Whether it proved trivial or vital remained to be seen. A worrying thought crossed Nathan's mind. Was Kirigakure about to shift its main attack toward the Blackstone stronghold? He quickly dismissed the notion. Why would the village leaders abandon their hard-fought campaign against Konoha and open a second major front here? Unless they'd already committed fresh reinforcements from the mainland. With only the troops currently inside the Land of Fire, no strategist would risk dividing their strength so drastically. It simply didn't add up. Transferring Kirigakure's shinobi through Ayuzu port is simply out of the question. And even if they somehow managed to slip past, Nara Chiguang could immediately reassign the Blackstone Fortress's defenses to intercept them. It would be utterly pointless. The only thing that seems to have Nara Chiguang genuinely on edge is the vague whisper that the Hidden Mist village might be reinforcing its ranks. But could that really be happening? Nathan murmured to himself, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. His instincts told him there was more to this than met the eye, yet no matter how he turned the problem over in his mind, he couldn't arrive at a conclusive answer. Finally, he exhaled and pushed the thoughts away. As the old saying goes, when an enemy approaches, the line must hold. When floods rise, the land must stand firm. Whatever plots or deceptions lay ahead, he would meet them head-on. He had honed his skills for years, free, unfettered by doubt. No half-baked rumor was going to throw him off course now. Nathan pressed on, his steps growing almost buoyant as the serious frown he'd worn all day slipped away, replaced once more by the cold mask he knew so well. Instead of returning home, he slipped into the forest, his usual training ground, and picked up the unfinished regimen he had left behind. Hours slipped by, until the moon reigned high overhead. Beneath its pale light, Nathan called upon the shadow clone technique one last time. He settled into a silent meditation. letting the flood of memories and battle data gleaned by his clones wash over him. Though torrents of information streamed into his mind, he kept his eyes closed, focusing every ounce of will on distilling those experiences into pure skill. Minute by minute, he refined each motion and tactic. Finally, after 15 minutes of intense concentration, Nathan opened his eyes. A bright spark of understanding danced within them, and a faint, satisfied smile touched his lips. He had achieved a new breakthrough. Nathan stood frozen for a heartbeat, then raised his hand. A pale blue orb of chakra blossomed in his palm, the unmarked ninjutsu Rasengan. It spun soundlessly, and though it seemed harmless, any ninja who drew near would feel a shiver of dread. This was a weapon of pure lethality. Without hesitation, Nathan pressed the swirling sphere against the rock beside him. In an instant, it bored straight through the stone, leaving behind a perfectly smooth spherical cavity. No shards flew, only a fine dust collected at the bottom. It was the unmistakable mark of absolute power concentrated to its peak. Nathan allowed a small, satisfied nod to cross his face. Then, with a single thought, he summoned his proficiency panel. In an instant, the familiar pale blue holographic screen materialized before Nathan, listing his freshly updated stats. Name, Uchiha. Nathan, age 12, physique 19, spirit 20, chakra 75,200, up from 124,430 to 132,724. Bloodline, 1576 and 50,000, 17,296. Byakugan, unawakened, 16,100. Techniques and skills, chakra refining technique, lever 5, 3,110, 5,000, 3,366, 5,000. Wind style Rasen Shuriken, level 7, 8,200, 20,000. Wind style Wind Wings 6, 600, 10, 4,400, 10,000. Fire style Great Dragon Fire Technique, var 5, 855,000. Fire style Unscorched Fire Technique, 5, 525, 5,000, 325, 10,000, now level 6. Water style Great Shark Bullet Technique, level 6, 6,900, 10,000, 2,980, 20,000, now level 7. Water style Water Array Pillar, level 2, 400, 500, 110,000, now level 6. Water style Water Break Wave, 1, 100, 752,000, now 4. Earth style Earth Flow Wall, 4, 752,000, 2,310,000, now 6. Lightning style 0, 15,100, 421. Shadow Clone Technique of 6, 610,000 to 4,008, 10,000. Shuriken Shadow Clone Technique, level 0, 45,100, 7 to 200s, now level 1. Chakra Absorption Technique, 6, 4,500, 10,000, 5,500, 10,000. Rasengan, level 7, 15,900, 20,000, 1650,000, now 8. Chakra Feather Cloak, 0, 62,100, 5 200s, now level 1. Palm Immortal Technique, 8, 40,200, 50,000, 48,720, 50,000. Chakra Scalpel, 6, 9,200, 10,000, 1,700, 20,000, now level 7. Microscopic Extraction Technique, 6, 3, 100, 10,000, 4,200, 10,000. Heart Reflection Technique, 8, 21,059, 50,000 to 24,131, 50,000. Chakra Control of 6, 1,300, 10,000, 2,100, 10,000. Guardian Seal, level 5, 365,000, 165,000. Sealing Array 3, 301,000, 907, 1,000. Perfect Skill Mastery, Wind Style, Water 5, Lightning Style, level 5, Earth Style. It was immediately obvious. After this round of training, Nathan's Rasengan had finally leveled up from 7 to 8. Nathan's recent refinement was immediately evident. His palm strike no longer erupted in a blaze of sparks or thunderous shockwaves, yet its force had never been more devastating. By suppressing any outward display, he'd rendered the technique far deadlier, its power now hidden until it struck. And that was only part of his progress over the last fortnight. His wind style, Wind Wings, remained at rank 6, but he'd surged from 640 to 4,400 experience points, 40% of the way toward the flawless mastery of rank 7. With each training session, the currents of air obeyed him more willingly, carrying him closer to true aerial domination. Even more significant was his advancement with the water style, great shark bullet technique. A massive infusion of chakra had propelled the jutsu from rank 6 straight to rank 7, resetting the experience gauge to 2,980. The shark ape torrent now packed a far heavier punch, and Nathan felt confident he could deflect or absorb most enemy ninjutsu while launching it. Yet this was not the technique's limit. From past study and battle, he knew that an A-rank ninjutsu like the Great Shark Bullet could rise to rank 9, 2 more transformative upgrades. In other words, its true potential still lay ahead, waiting for Nathan to claim it. Nathan could almost sense that, once he perfected this new technique, he might be able to rival a tailed beast ball. Of course, he wouldn't know for certain until he actually tested it in combat. Pushing that thought aside, he lowered his gaze and reviewed his other skills. His earth-style, hardening technique had reached its peak, dramatically amplifying his ninjutsu power while slashing his chakra consumption. Meanwhile, his shadow clone technique, palm immortal technique, and reflection heart technique had all seen significant gains as well. Satisfied with the hardening breakthrough, Nathan redistributed his chakra reserves. He devoted 20,000 points to his fire-style, unshining burning technique, doubling its daily allocation from 20,000 to 40,000. In just the past 2 weeks, its proficiency leapt from level 5, 525/5,000, to level 6, 325/10,000. The remaining 30,000 points went to his water style, unshining water-breaking wave, boosting it from level 1, 1,200, to level 4, 750/2,000. This surge in power made the wave technique far more practical in both offense and defense. With his elemental arts now stronger than ever, Nathan allowed himself a moment of quiet confidence before turning his focus back to the new jutsu that might one day stand alongside the greatest attacks in the ninja world. Nathan hadn't channeled any chakra into his training for almost a week, so his progress had stalled. If he could manage a steady input of 30,000 chakra points every day, though, his development would accelerate dramatically. His mastery of the palm immortal technique had also received an unexpected boost. Having served as a medical ninja and treated a steady stream of wounded patients, he'd earned an extra 3,000 proficiency points beyond his original estimate. Now he stood at level 8, 48,720 out of 50,000 points, just one step shy of achieving perfection at level 9. At this rate, he expected to break through within 5 days. Once perfected, the technique would not only strengthen his body more effectively, but also shorten the time needed to raise his physique attribute. His only regret was that no matter how refined the palm immortal technique became, he still couldn't recover the chakra he poured into it each day. Body strengthening demanded a constant supply of energy. Shaking his head, Nathan set the palm immortal technique aside and turned his attention to the 2 other medical ninjutsu laid out before him, the chakra scalpel and the thin injury extraction technique. Nathan sat cross-legged on the training mats, reviewing his latest skill logs. Like his palm immortal technique, his other hand-to-hand art had seen a solid uptick in proficiency. The first skill surged by roughly 2,400 points, catapulting it to level 7, the seal-free form he'd been striving for, making it fully combat-ready. The second technique, however, with its narrower applications, only climbed about 1,100 points and still has a long way to go before it reaches the perfect level 7 state. His 2 sealing arts, the Guardian Seal and the Sealing Array, showed only modest improvements since both require relatively little chakra to execute. In contrast, his chakra control ability exploded in proficiency. Previously, he had to expend chakra just to practice and refine this skill. Now, it has become almost passive. Every time he trains or levels up any technique, his chakra control automatically ticks upward. That change alone eased a huge burden off Nathan's shoulders. On top of these planned advancements, the past 2 weeks have been especially productive. With the generous chakra donations the Mist Ninjas, even Nathan's secondary skills, Those outside his main training regimen have leapt forward. Sitting there, he could almost feel the power humming beneath his skin, waiting to be unleashed. Nathan methodically perfected each of his C-rank ninjutsu. Wind style, fierce wind palm, water style, water wave, and lightning style, lightning strike, to level 500. Even though inefficiencies limited his extra chakra utilization to just 60 to 70% of its theoretical potential, the sheer volume more than compensated. On day 1, he siphoned a staggering 250,000 chakra from the Mist Ninjas. After losses incurred by repeatedly dispelling shadow clones and refreshing his status, he still cleared over 200,000 usable points. By the end of the fortnight, Nathan had accumulated a total of 3.5 million chakra. At 70% efficiency, that translated into roughly 2.45 million usable points. Because advancing a C-rank skill by 1 proficiency point costs only about 80 to 85 chakra, Nathan's newfound reservoir was more than enough. Before this training burst, his proficiency stood at Fierce Wind Palm, level 2, 310-500, needing 3,190 points to reach level 500. Water Wave, level 3, 60,000, needing 2,940 points to reach level 5. Lightning Strike, level 1, 200, needing 3,699 points to reach level 500. With over 2 million points still to spare, Nathan could now push each technique to its fullest potential, and then some. Nathan channeled his chakra into mastering the 3 C-rank ninjutsu. Together they required 9,829 proficiency points, about 800,000 to 850,000 chakra, but with 2.5 million chakra at his command, he completed them effortlessly and still had roughly 1.7 million chakra to spare. Without hesitation, he poured that surplus into 2 B-rank techniques, Water Style, Water Array Pillar, and Earth Style, Earth Flow Wall. At 100 chakra per proficiency point, 1.7 million chakra translated into 17,000 points. Splitting them evenly meant each skill gained over 8,000 points. Water Array Pillar leapt from level 2, 400-500, to level 6, 1,000-10,000, and Earth Flow Wall soared from level 4, 750-2,000, to level 6, 2,300-10,000. With those upgrades, both jutsu formally joined Nathan's combat arsenal, giving him far more versatility on the battlefield. As for Fire Style, Great Dragon Fire technique, he still hadn't invested any of his remaining chakra. He planned to focus on it next. Because the skill required no chakra investment, Nathan only activated it a handful of times during the fight, adding a mere 10 or 20 proficiency points, which was all but negligible. He'd also unlocked 3 other techniques: Lightning Release, Lightning Body, the Shuriken Shadow Clone technique, and the Chakra Feather Cloak, but had only trained each to its basic level before shelving them. Notably, once Nathan perfected Lightning Release, Lightning Strike, he redirected the 5,000 chakra points he'd been pouring into the Shadow Clone technique over to Lightning Strike. That shift boosted his daily chakra allotment for the clone jutsu from 30,000 to 35,000 points, and his daily proficiency gain jumped from 200 to 230 points. As a result, over the past 2 weeks, his Shadow Clone mastery surged far beyond expectations. He's now at level 6 with 4,008 of the 10,000 points needed. At this pace, he'll reach a perfected level 7 in about 25 days. Nathan's eyes flicked over the lines in the Konoha sealed book. If his instincts were right, he'd soon unlock the forbidden multiple shadow clone technique. For now, though, it offered him nothing. He dismissed the thought, closed the book, and rose to his feet. Forming the hand seals for wind release, he felt a rush of chakra surge through him. In an instant, ethereal wind wings sprouted from his back, lifting him into the air. With today's training regimen complete, he turned toward the camp below. It was time to head back and rest. Chapter 527. Conspiracy. Before dawn the next morning, Nathan assembled 2 squads, more than 100 shinobi in all, and set off toward the Blackstone stronghold. He couldn't help but recall how, the first time he and Uchiha Shisui had made this journey, it had taken them the better part of a morning. Now, with their enlarged force, they needed to push hard if they hoped to arrive before noon. Any lengthy rest would jeopardize the timetable. Only their chakra reserves kept them moving through the yawning fatigue. By mid-morning, the strain was starting to tell. Nathan surveyed the formation behind him. Breaths came in ragged gasps, lines wavered, and armor straps hung loose. Raising his hand, he called out, "Hold up, let's take 15 minutes." Immediately, the Konoha ninjas broke into small clusters of 3 to 5, collapsing onto the forest floor to catch their breath. Dozens of genin popped military ration pills, flooding their bodies with chakra. For Nathan, whose constitution attribute scored 19 and whose chakra pool exceeded 130,000, this short pause was little more than a light reprieve. Yet to the younger ninjas, it was a vital chance to recover before they pressed on toward the stronghold. After a brief moment's hesitation, Nathan formed the seals for wind style, wind wings, and shot upward, the rush of air carrying him high above the treetops. What he didn't notice, however, was a hidden shinobi from Konoha slipping behind him to carve a secret seal into a nearby trunk. Once aloft, Nathan hovered, sweeping the forest floor with wary eyes. Nara Chiguang's odd behavior earlier in the day had set him on edge, and Chiguang's warning that Kirigakure might stir up trouble at the Blackstone stronghold only deepened his suspicions. With that in mind, Nathan rose and fell at intervals, using his aerial vantage to scan for enemies. Yet as they neared their destination, the woods remained unnervingly quiet. No patrols, no ambushes, nothing to justify the alarm. Nathan's brow furrowed. Was Chiguang's intelligence flawed? It wasn't impossible. If his source had been that reliable, they would have issued a clear directive instead of a vague caution. Still, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was watching and waiting. Nathan couldn't shake his doubts about the intelligence they'd received. When Nara Chiguang first brought him the unconfirmed report, Nathan had been ordered to investigate, and with no way to verify it in advance, the only option was to proceed with the utmost caution. Thankfully, his true strength far outstripped any foe he might face. No matter what surprises lay ahead, he trusted himself to handle them. 15 silent minutes passed before Nathan dropped to one knee, touching down lightly. The forest around them remained eerily still. He swept his gaze over the leaf shinobi, some crouched, some standing at ease, then spoke without preamble. "Everyone assemble." Instantly, the Konoha ninjas snapped into a tight defensive formation. Satisfied, Nathan gave a curt nod. "Let's move." With that, he led the way, sprinting toward the looming silhouette of the Blackstone stronghold. His team fell in step behind him, ready for whatever awaited inside. Nathan checked his watch as he led the group along the forest path. Nearly an hour had passed since they left the last hamlet, and the sun now stood high overhead. Just ahead lay the outskirts of the Blackstone stronghold, and beyond that, the final stretch through the dense woodland that marked the fortress's outer defenses. He paused to review their situation. Ever since the Mist Ninjas' counterattack at Yujin Port had been repelled, every unit along the front line had dug in defensively, including the contingents from Feiyu Town that normally patrolled outside the stronghold. Thanks to their swift, covert advance, no one in Feiyu Town or the surrounding outposts could have received word of their approach in time to intercept them. With that reassurance, Nathan felt a surge of confidence. "Let's keep moving," he ordered, voice low but firm. The others mirrored his determination, tucking weapons close and stepping carefully into the shadowed forest beyond. They slipped beneath the canopy, the underbrush crackling softly beneath their boots. Shafts of sunlight pierced the leaves, spotlighting fallen logs and tangled roots. Nathan scanned every rustle of brush, alert for the slightest hint of an enemy patrol. So far, nothing, until a sudden crack echoed through the trees. Shouts rang out, arrows whistled, and figures clad in black leapt from hiding spots on either side of the path. Nathan barely had time to shout, "Ambush!" before the first volleys struck. He yanked his cloak aside, drew his sword, and charged forward into the tangled thicket, knowing all too well that an ambush in this kind of terrain could cost them dearly. Nathan crouched in the forest undergrowth, his eyes narrowing as he took in the ranks of mist ninjas arrayed before him. Their ambush was too perfectly executed. Every detail had been cleaned up, every pathway watched. He'd walked straight into their trap without so much as a warning. Whoever warned them must have known exactly where and when they'd make camp, and had long ago given the order to strike. That could only mean their positions had been betrayed. But why? Were the assassins aiming for the Konoha army or for him personally? A raid on Konoha forces would be bad enough, but if Nathan himself was the quarry, then he would make them pay. His dark gaze flicked over the silent enemy line. If they thought they'd catch him off guard, they had another thing coming. He clenched his jaw. How had the information slipped out? Nara Shikaku? His first thought was of Konoha's strategist, but he shook it off. If even Shikaku were a traitor, Konoha would have collapsed long ago. Someone else must be feeding the mist their secrets, and Nathan intended to root out the spy before he made his next move. Could it be they were targeting him specifically? The idea wasn't impossible, but it felt absurdly unlikely. The Uchiha and Nara clans had their tensions, but never to the point of deliberately singling out Nathan. Besides, whoever leaked that order must have been unaware of his involvement, information that even Nara Kimitsu hadn't confirmed. No hidden network in the entire Shinobi world, not even within Konoha, could fabricate intelligence so clandestine, then coerce its subject into obedience without leaving the faintest trace. Only a handful of individuals, or perhaps a single shadowy organization, could pull that off. Could it have been them? Ao's mind turned instantly to Danzo and his secretive root operatives. This wasn't mere conjecture on Nathan's part. Danzo had orchestrated too many dirty schemes and run afoul of them on more than one occasion. With the war's end looming, opportunities to confront him were slipping away. And knowing Danzo's ruthless nature, it was all too plausible that he intended to exploit the final chaos of battle to eliminate anyone he viewed as a threat. Nathan had only recently destroyed Danzo's secret base on Onagai Island. Even though no evidence remained, Danzo would find a way to pin the blame on him, and once he did, dealing with Nathan would be a foregone conclusion. Danzo brooked no insolence, especially not from an Uchiha. 1,000 thoughts flickered through Nathan's mind, but he shoved them aside. He needed a plan. One thing was clear: charging straight in was suicide. The Mist Ninjas arrayed before him outnumbered and outclassed him in every respect. But running wasn't an option either. He cast a quick glance over his shoulder and realized the path he'd used to get here had been cut off. Danzo's men must have set up an ambush. Escape would be impossible. So there was only one play left. Nathan inhaled slowly, gathering his resolve. "You'd rather settle this with a fight," he murmured under his breath, his eyes tracing the silent, ready stance of the approaching Mist Ninjas. With nothing left to lose, he squared his shoulders and prepared to meet them head-on. Chapter 528, A Show of Strength and Discovery. Nathan's heart pounded as he watched the Mist Ninja before him shift uneasily. Then someone, no one could tell who, bellowed, "Fire!" In the next instant, a torrential storm of kunai erupted overhead, filling the air like a deadly hail. Every shadowed crevice seemed swarmed, leaving no refuge for the defending shinobi. Below him, the lowest-ranking ninjas went pale and staggered back, while the middle and upper-tier shinobi readied their own kunai, eyes wide with dread, bracing for impact. Nathan knew devastation would follow if those explosive-tagged blades struck home. Their formation, already inferior in skill and discipline, could not withstand such an onslaught. Chaos would reign, and victory would slip away. "No, stop this now," he resolved. Leaping forward, Nathan formed hand seals in a blur. With a determined shout, he slammed his palm into the earth and unleashed his most formidable defensive technique. Earth-style, earth flow wall. The very ground quaked beneath him as a towering wall of rock and soil shot up, intercepting the lethal rain of weaponry. Rumble echoed through the battlefield, and the avalanche of kunai clattered harmlessly against the rising barrier, sparks flying in every direction. For a moment, everything held still, dust churning, hearts racing, before Nathan's newfound wall of earth stood as a testament to both his strength and his resolve. A moment later, a 50-meter-long, 10-meter-high wall of earth sprang up across the forest, cutting off the Mist Ninja's assault and shielding the Konoha shinobi behind it. Just weeks ago, Nathan would have struggled to form such a massive barrier in seconds. But now that his Earth-style, Earth Flow Wall had been upgraded to level 6, 2300 or 1000, it was almost effortless. The incoming kunai struck the earthen bulwark, some ricocheting harmlessly back, others lodging in the soil or detonating on impact, yet none broke through or harmed the defenders. Even the attackers paid the price. Shrapnel and debris scattered back into their ranks, leaving several mist ninjas bleeding and disoriented. From his vantage point atop the newly risen rampart, Nathan ignored the lingering explosions and moved through the familiar hand seals. He funneled Earth-style chakra through his feet into the barrier, then released his grip on the seals to unleash Earth-style Earth Spear. The wall trembled as chakra tunneled downward into the forest floor, coalescing into rock spikes as thick as a child's arm. In a flash, dozens of these jagged pillars shot upward like bolts of stone lightning, impaling the stunned mist ninjas below. The forest fell silent, broken only by the dull thud of earth settling and the heavy breathing of those who had just witnessed Nathan's new strength. In the blink of an eye, the dense forest ahead erupted into a forest of jagged stone pillars. Hundreds of rocky spires, all varying in height and thickness, shot up from the earth like inverted stalactites, their sudden emergence sending a chill through every shinobi present. The Mist Ninja squad scattered. Most managed to dodge or leap clear of the assault. But a handful, those of middling skill and misfortune, found themselves squarely in Nathan's sights. Before they could react or form hand seals, serrated spikes tore through armor and flesh, impaling them simultaneously. Their screams rang out in a horrifying chorus, echoing among the trees. Nathan's rapid Earth-style technique had caught them completely off guard. He'd formed 2 swift seals and unleashed his ninjutsu before any of the Mist Ninjas realized what was coming. Yet the display of power came at a cost. The earthen barrier he'd summoned, Earth-style, Earth Flow Wall, crumbled beneath his feet the moment its sustaining chakra was spent. No sooner had the dust settled than a squad of Konoha shinobi appeared at Nathan's back, stepping into the clearing. From the Mist Ninja ranks a shrill command pierced the air. Kill them! With kunai in hand, the remaining Mist Ninjas surged forward, their blades glee, med through the dim forest light as they charged Nathan and his allies, determined to avenge their fallen comrades. Organize our defenses, Nathan barked to the Konoha Jonin at his side. Without waiting for a reply, he wove the hand seals for wind-style wind wings. In an instant, he burst through the treetops and shot skyward. Below him, a squad of Kirigakure shinobi was cutting through the dense undergrowth, charging straight at their position. Nathan didn't hesitate. He formed seals in rapid succession and unleashed fire-style, great fireball technique. A roaring sphere of flame, nearly 30 meters in diameter, coalesced at his lips. Its blistering heat and blinding light briefly obscured the sun. Everyone in the clearing, leaf ninjas and mist ninjas alike, stared upward in stunned silence as Nathan guided the colossal fireball down into the heart of the enemy formation. Treetops along its path blackened, cracked, and exploded into showers of embers. "Defenses, now!" one of the Konoha shinobi yelled. From the mist side came frantic shouts. "Dodge it! Form a barrier! No, knock it out of the sky!" But it was too late. With a thunderous roar, the great fireball slammed into the mist squad, engulfing them in an inferno that sent shockwaves through the forest. Smoke and ash billowed upward, and the battle for the forest's edge had only just begun. 3 Kirigakure shinobi struck at once, each unleashing water release, water dragon bullet technique. In a heartbeat, 3 massive serpents of water coalesced in midair and surged toward Nathan's flaming orb. When fire met water, time seemed to freeze. High above the field, the 3 water dragons arched into a perfect pin shape, bracing the fireball between them. Wherever fire licked water, thick white steam roiled upward, like a cauldron at its boiling point, ready to erupt at any moment. True to its threat, the stalemate lasted only a single breath. Then, in a thunderous explosion, the fireball and water dragons shattered into torrents of flame and cascades of spray, drenching the ground below. Everyone on the field reeled back, stunned by the sudden blast. Because Nathan's true target had been the Mist Squadron, they suffered the brunt of the backlash. Their formation splintered, and their attack rhythm faltered. Seizing the moment, Nathan transmitted a sharp warning through his chakra network, an unmistakable signal: back off. He was about to launch his next barrage when something at the edge of the smoke caught his eye. Through drifting vapors, he could just make out silhouettes moving toward them, figures he remembered seeing on the way here. Reinforcements, or perhaps something far more dangerous. Nathan straightened, ready for whatever was coming. Nathan cast a quick glance at the Konoha squad assembled below. No Hyuga shinobi were among them this time, just as he had suspected. Calmly, he lifted a hand to rub away the tiny seal between his brows. The moment it vanished, his Byakugan flared to life. Through the faint barrier of his forehead protector, Nathan's vision pierced the distance. There, blocking the only road out, stood a squad of Kirigakure operatives. His expression remained composed until, at the edge of his sight, something caught his attention. One figure in particular stood out. Through the web of chakra channels that Byakugan reveals, Nathan saw hundreds of minute insects clinging to this ninja's flow, tiny parasitic bugs, drawing on his life energy. That unmistakable sight belonged only to the Aburame clan. Nathan's brow furrowed in concern. Why was an insect master of the Aburame hidden among Kirigakure's ranks? The question weighed on him as he considered his next move. Whatever their plan, it was more complicated than a simple ambush. Nathan's mind raced as he observed the stranger's actions. His jaw clenched in frustration. No matter how strong he was, relying on rumors and assumptions left him vulnerable. If he wanted solid answers, unvarnished truth, he had to capture this person himself. He'd almost taken off when a sudden roar of battle reached his ears. Looking down, Nathan saw mist ninjas clashing violently with Konoha shinobi. Without hesitation, he formed a sealing hand sign and unleashed the shadow clone technique. Bang! Out of the swirling chakra smoke emerged two identical Nathans, each bearing ethereal chakra wings. The original did not pause to admire the effect. He pointed to one clone and commanded, "Go to Blackstone Base. Find Sano Nobuhisa. Tell him we need immediate reinforcements." Turning to the second clone, Nathan ordered, "You're with the Konoha shinobi. Help them hold off the mist ninjas until backup arrives." With that, the clones took flight. One streaking toward the Blackstone base, the other diving into the fray below. Nathan himself hovered briefly, eyes narrowing as he sought the mysterious figure whose presence threatened to tip the balance. Steeling himself, he prepared to confront the stranger directly, determined to unmask his identity and unravel his purpose once and for all. With a single thought, Nathan propelled himself toward the distant mist ninja. Chapter 529, Chopping Melons and Vegetables. In the distance, the mist shinobi's advance slowed to a cautious crawl. Then, as if night itself had taken shape, a black blur rocketed toward them. At first it looked like nothing more than a speck, but in the next instant, every eye registering that shape recognized it for what it was, Nathan. Their faces blanched, but before they could even draw a breath, Nathan closed the gap. He moved at better than 200 meters per second, yet made no overt gesture that might alert his foes. He didn't bother locking eyes with the lone figure who might be an Aburame clansman. Instead, he swept his gaze over the entire formation below. Two squads, just over 30 shinobi in all. Small numbers, yes, but each one far above the usual mist ambush team lurking in the forest. Not a single ninja here ranked below Chunin. In fact, they boasted 5 jonin, 1 genuine master, and 4 special jonin, each famous for a single devastating technique. A formidable force, yet still no match for Nathan's reputation and raw power. The two sides were already on hostile terms, so there was no time for pleasantries. Combat erupted instantly. Dozens of kunai tore through the air, all aimed straight at Nathan. He didn't flinch. Instead, he raised a hand, formed the familiar seals, and unleashed his ninjutsu, wind style, great breakthrough. A roaring gale burst from his mouth, blasting the kunai aside mid-flight. The back row mist ninjas, caught off guard by the sudden tempest, lurched and scrambled to avoid the swirling winds. Nathan's eyes narrowed as the battlefield momentarily fell into disarray. Seizing his chance, he cut off the technique, flexed his wings, and shot forward like a living arrow. In the next heartbeat, he stood before one particularly startled mist ninja. "Ah!" the ninja cried out, arm rising to strike. But it was too late. Nathan's Sharingan clicked open, and with a subtle flicker of his eyes, he layered on a powerful genjutsu, binding the ninja's will to his own. The enemy's defiant shout died in his throat as Nathan took full control. Nathan formed his hand into a flat palm and swept it across the shinobi's neck. In an instant, a thin sheath of chakra coalesced around his palm, slicing through the man's carotid artery. This wasn't ordinary ninjutsu, but a 7th-level medical technique, chakra scalpel, cast without a single hand seal. In such close combat, its stealth and suddenness were lethal. The Kirigakure Chunin didn't even have time to react before collapsing, life snuffed out in a heartbeat. Before Nathan could catch his breath, a shout rang out. A Kirigakure special jonin, positioned just behind the fallen Chunin, pinpointed Nathan's location and hurled a kunai in his direction. Nathan's keen eyes noted a shimmering aura around the blade, wind escape chakra woven into it to boost its cutting power. Even so, it mattered little to him. Instead of dodging, he calmly formed a hand seal and invoked earth-style, hardening technique. The ground beneath him trembled and hardened like iron, halting the kunai's flight as effortlessly as if it had struck a stone wall. Nathan had come a long way since first learning the earth-style hardening technique. Back then, every time he activated it, his normally pale skin would turn coarse and pitch black. Now, his flesh only darkens slightly, but its protective power has skyrocketed. A kunai fired straight at him clanged harmlessly off his forearm, the metallic ding echoing in the tense courtyard. Across the field, Kujiohara's eyes widened in surprise. Sensing his moment, Nathan blurred forward. With a flick of both wrists, he unleashed his chakra scalpel, the chakra blades slicing cleanly through the throats of 3 Kirigakure Chunin. These were no pushovers, mid-level shinobi respected throughout the ninja world, but against Nathan, they fell as easily as chickens. The power gap between them was simply too great. Before anyone could react, a fresh volley of shuriken and explosive tags shot toward him. Unfazed, Nathan sprang upward, his ridden skin deflecting the incoming assault. He hovered just above the chaos, ready for whatever came next. Nathan whirled around, pressing his fingertips together in a tight seal. Fire style, great dragon fire technique, he intoned. With a roar, a column of flame burst from his mouth and split into 3 colossal fire dragons that surged toward the mist shinobi arrayed before him. Water style, water array wall, came a command from one of the senior Kirigakure Chunin, instantly raising a shimmering barrier of water. At the same time, a second veteran shouted, water style, water dragon bullet technique, and sent a spiraling torrent of water to intercept another fiery beast. 2 of Nathan's dragons collided with the water defenses, steam hissing into the night air as fire met water. But the 3rd dragon slipped past the barriers, racing straight into the heart of the Mist Ninja formation. The Mist Shinobi scattered just in time to avoid its scorching maw, ducking behind trees and boulders for cover. Before they could regroup, 2 sharp cracks split the air. Brilliant arcs of lightning leapt from Nathan's outstretched palms, forming twin electric serpents that shot forward over 10 meters. They struck 2 Chunin squarely in the chest. Ah! The pair cried out in pain, but their screams were cut short almost as soon as they began. When the crackling glow faded, both were lying on the ground, charred from head to toe, utterly still. Nathan stood at the center of the clearing, his breathing steady. Around him, the Mist Ninja team hesitated, shock and fear in their eyes. With his fire dragon spent and his lightning finished, he took the moment to size up his opponents and prepare his next move. A faint scent of scorched meat still hung in the air, clear proof of Nathan's lightning release, lightning strike, and its devastating power. With a single, decisive beat of his wings, Nathan pivoted and shot upward, evading every counterattack the Mist Ninjas sent after him. His movement was fluid and precise. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion. But instead of diving back in for a surprise assault, he hovered high above the battlefield, looking down at his adversaries. Below him, the Mist Shinobi dared not make a careless move. Nathan's display of speed, mastery of ninjutsu, and the piercing red of his Sharingan had burned itself into their memories. Combined with his aerial advantage, he had cut through their ranks as effortlessly as slicing through fruit, and the thought of it sent a chill through their hearts. One by one, Nathan's eyes swept over the assembled Chunin and Jonin. Every face showed the same dread, except for a single figure at the edge of the formation. The lone ninja of the Aburame clan stood perfectly still, unreadable and unafraid. Nathan glanced over the Kirigakure Chunin's terrified faces, and thanks to his Sharingan, saw straight through their panic. It was only a mask. That realization confirmed his mounting suspicion. Danzo must be behind this ambush. After all, in the ninja world, only Danzo's most fanatical agents, those who've endured the ruthless self-annihilation, training, and come to see themselves as nothing more than living weapons, could feign indifference to death so convincingly. There was no point in wasting time on the rank and file. Nathan cast a quick, calculating look at the handful of Chunin edging toward the Aburame clan shinobi, then met the cold gazes of the 5 jonin standing guard. Without a second's hesitation, he unfurled his wings and swept forward to confront the Kirigakure squad. Chapter 530, Success. Move in. Attack. The lead mist ninja barked as Nathan closed the distance. He formed a hand seal in midair and unleashed a Suitin technique, spewing fist-sized water orbs like cannon blasts straight at Nathan. His plan was simple: slow Nathan down long enough for the other mist shinobi to swarm him. But Nathan was a step ahead. With his Sharingan activated at full power, the incoming water projectiles crawled almost to a standstill, completely stripped of threat. Coupled with the extraordinary agility granted by his wind wings, Nathan wove among the orbs with effortless grace, his pace never faltering. In the chaos that followed, only 4 specialist jonin and a handful of the quickest responding chunin even managed to launch an attack. The rest had no time to react. Unfazed, Nathan ignored their hastily fired ninjutsu and thrown tools. Instead, he enveloped himself in his earth escape, hardening technique, and donned his chakra feather robe, his personal shield against both physical strikes and elemental assaults. With his defenses locked in, Nathan surged forward, ready to turn the tide in his favor. Nathan's new jutsu was only level 1, so its defensive power was minimal. Yet he hadn't deployed it to fend off the mist ninja's blow so much as to keep his uniform from being shredded. In the last exchange, even though Nathan's earth escape, hardening technique had held, his clothes were full of holes. A couple more rounds like that, and he'd be fighting half naked. Sure, he carried spare uniforms sealed inside a scroll in his ninja pouch, but changing outfits cost precious time. Time he couldn't afford if he wanted to stay alive. To Nathan, the extra layer was purely practical. To his opponents, it looked like a groundbreaking ninjutsu no one had ever seen. After all, the ninja world had no precedent for something like Naruto's future tailed beast coat. Drawing on a half-remembered image, Nathan created what he called the chakra feather robe. Powered by wind chakra, it took on a soft, sky-blue hue rather than the blazing reds and golds of legend, but its sleek, full-body design still caught every eye on the battlefield. It wouldn't stop every attack, but it would at least keep his clothes and his dignity intact. Nathan's chakra feather robe shuddered under the impact of several incoming jutsu, but he grit his teeth and held it together. Spreading his wings, he shot upward out of range before the mist ninja could unleash a second volley. High above the melee, Nathan's gaze locked onto an Aburame clan shinobi weaving through the smoke below. With a flick of his wrist, he formed the seals and called out, "Fire style, hidden blaze technique." Having pushed the jutsu to his personal level 6, its raw power and stealth were both greatly enhanced. Even so, the Aburame ninja vanished in a blur before the flames ignited. Through his Sharingan, Nathan caught a split-second glimmer of something strange, an odd, unfamiliar hue flickering in the opponent's eyes just as the technique was released. A sudden realization struck him. In every skirmish over the past fortnight, or longer, he had never bothered to conceal his use of the hidden blaze technique. Though not a forbidden art, it was a closely guarded Anbu secret, nearly impossible for outsiders to acquire. And yet here was this ninja, somehow aware of it. Nathan's heart raced. If his signature jutsu was recognized, who else had been watching? If Danzo bothered to trace how Nathan had come by this new technique, he'd find it simply materialized out of thin air. Combine that with the Sharingan's notorious power to copy any jutsu, and the fact that one of the 2 root shinobi stationed on Ghostworld Island already knew the same art, and, even with the flimsiest of evidence, a crafty mind could link the two. Ordinary investigators might shrug it off as coincidence, but Danzo was far from ordinary. His deep-seated hatred for the Uchiha would skew his reasoning until he saw Nathan's hand in everything. Guilt or innocence didn't matter. Danzo would forge a case. It was the same warped logic that had him suspect the so-called Pot King of outlandish conspiracies despite zero proof. With Nathan's mastery of flying ninjutsu and ample opportunity to strike, pinning the destruction of the Onigashima base on him would be almost inevitable in Danzo's eyes. Given Danzo's ruthless nature, it wasn't hard for Nathan to suspect him of being the mastermind behind the recent murders. Even without hard proof, Nathan's instincts screamed that Danzo was to blame, and he wasn't about to let it go. Ever since Danzo had dispatched root operatives to ambush him at the end of the Chunin exams, and then sent more hit squads afterward, Nathan had resolved every attack, but he'd never forgotten who'd set them in motion. He swore he'd hold Danzo and his root ninja accountable the next time they crossed paths. Thoughts racing, Nathan beat his wings in powerful strokes, surging forward with blinding speed. He danced around the second volley of shurikens and sealed the gap to the mist ninja squad blocking his way. The instant his boots touched the ground, he unleashed his secret technique, wind style, wind wings. Nathan slammed his foot into the ground. Spiderweb cracks splintered beneath him before he shot forward like a cannonball, scattering a half-dozen Kirigakure Chunin in his wake. He skidded to a halt directly in front of the Aburame clan ninja. He'd planned to trap his opponent with Genjutsu Sharingan, but the Aburame's reflexes were uncanny. Without releasing a single insect, the ninja closed his eyes, twisted, and used a nearby Chunin as cover. In a blur of motion, Nathan drew his longsword. Wind chakra spiraled along the blade's edge as he swung, cleaving through the hidden Chunin's defenses and felling him in a single, brutal arc. Before Nathan could recover, a volley of kunai hissed in from behind. His enhanced hearing picked them up early. He darted aside, letting the thrown blades clatter harmlessly against the courtyard stones. Unhesitatingly, he lunged back toward the Aburame ninja. Their blades met with a sharp clang, Nathan's sword striking a raised kunai. Sparks flew as the two locked eyes in the sudden stillness. "Root?" Nathan asked, his voice low and steady. At that name, the Aburame's eyes snapped open wide beneath his closed lids, pupils dilating in stunned recognition. Nathan never expected his adversary to underestimate him so badly. Even after all his rigorous training, the other man still flinched for a split second, and Nathan's Sharingan caught it. A cold smile curved Nathan's lips. There would be no more games. He thrust out his palm, and the moment his opponent's attention wavered, drove a level 8 Rasengan straight into his chest. Beneath his forehead guard, the pale white eye tracked every detail. Nathan saw the tiny insects inside the Aburame clan ninja's body surge to the impact point, erecting a makeshift armor that took the full force of the blow. It was enough to save his life, but it left him grievously wounded, blood oozing from the corner of his mouth. Nathan sheathed his sword in one fluid motion and vanished from sight, his footsteps no more than a blur. He weaved through the remaining mist ninja's attacks, then reappeared behind the injured Aburame shinobi. With a precise strike to the base of the neck, he snapped the clan ninja's spine. The man collapsed without a sound. Hoisting the limp body over his shoulder, Nathan launched himself into the air with a series of powerful leaps, putting distance between himself and the mist squad. They poured forward in pursuit, but by then, it was already too late. Nathan disappeared into the gathering darkness, leaving only silence in his wake. Nathan raised his hand, formed a swift seal, and unleashed his technique, wind style, wings of wind. In an instant, he scooped up the stunned Barame clan shinobi and rocketed skyward. Below him, the Kirigakure ninja team hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. Nathan's lightning-fast escape had been fueled not only by perfect timing and speed, but by their own momentary doubt. After all, who expected a so-called average Chunin to pull off something so audacious? That split-second overthinking cost them the chance to stop him. Even if they'd pressed the attack, though, it wouldn't have changed much. Nathan wasn't defenseless in a head-on clash. With the power and techniques he'd cultivated, dispatching a handful of mist ninja would be little more than a challenge, one he was entirely ready to meet. Didn't you see? In no time at all, they'd already lost 7 or 8 men. 2 squads, over 30 fighters, weren't a real threat to Nathan. If he hadn't been concerned they'd scatter and make a mess of things, he would have activated his Mangekyou Sharingan long ago. Instead, it just spared him a bit of trouble. Chapter 531, Confirmation. Nathan hovered in midair, clutching his captive as he eyed the ever-vigilant mist ninjas arrayed below. After a moment's consideration, he raised his right hand, drew in a steady stream of chakra, and unleashed the shadow clone technique. For someone of his skill, the hand seals were purely habitual. He'd learned long ago that with sufficient chakra control, seals weren't strictly necessary. Still, since he intended this clone to sprout wings, he made a single, symbolic hand seal. With a crackle of chakra mist, a perfect duplicate of Nathan emerged beside him. He gave the clone a cool nod, then tipped his chin toward the ninja squad below. "Go on. Have some fun." Heh! The clone's lips curled into a sneer. Without another word, it dove toward the mist ninjas, ready to unleash a barrage of ninjutsu. Nathan hovered silently at the edge of the skirmish, eyes fixed on the unfolding fight below. After a few moments, he realized that as long as his shadow clone remained airborne, it posed little real threat to the mist ninjas. Satisfied, he released his hold on the Aburame clan shinobi he'd collected and soared away, leaving only the clone to carry on the battle. Below, the mist ninjas exchanged incredulous glances. Their original target had simply vanished, leaving a solitary shadow clone to challenge their entire squad. On one hand, they felt insulted. Nathan's departure was an obvious slight. On the other, relief washed over them. They'd never devised a reliable way to defeat Nathan himself. With his true form gone, the battle had become far less daunting. The shadow clone was no easy foe, but its cracks were visible to any skilled shinobi. If they committed enough resources, no matter the cost, they could shatter it. Dealing with the copy was infinitely simpler than facing Nathan's genuine talent. Oblivious to their scheming, Nathan drifted out of range. Before severing his mental link, he gifted the mist ninjas a final boon, a fragment of his art of mind connecting. Then, he accelerated to well over 100 meters per second. 5 minutes later, having covered more than 30 kilometers, he finally slowed, coming to rest in a quiet valley far from the day's tumult. Safe for the moment, Nathan allowed himself a small grin. The clone in the battlefield below could handle itself, at least long enough for him to prepare his next move. Nathan hovered above the dense canopy, his Byakugan piercing the foliage until he found a deserted stretch of jungle below. With a silent exhale, he dropped from the sky, landing with a thud that rattled the undergrowth. Before him lay an Aburame clan shinobi, unmoving. Without hesitation, Nathan seized the ninja and slammed him against the earth. The crack of impact echoed through the trees. 1 second, 2, 3, the minutes stretched on, yet the Aburame shinobi remained still, breathing evenly, as if in deep slumber. Nathan crouched back, arms folded. "All right," he called, voice low. "Enough faking it. Wake up." Silence answered him. Nathan shook his head in frustration. "If you don't make a move soon, you'll miss your chance." No sooner had the words left his mouth than the ninja's breathing shifted. In a single, explosive motion, he sprang to his feet as if propelled by a spring, and charged Nathan like a cannonball. At the same instant, a kunai materialized in his hand, its blade pointed straight at Nathan's heart. Remarkably, the ninja's eyes remained shut, an obvious safeguard against Nathan's Sharingan genjutsu. Even now, he was nothing more than a living weapon, honed from the first day of his training. Nathan braced himself, ready for the deadly strike. Nathan's composure was remarkable, even under such dire circumstances. Yet in the face of overwhelming power, all his calculations were useless. Early on, his Byakugan had alerted him to a sudden surge in his opponent's chakra, a clear sign the foe was awakening, and he'd steeled himself for whatever came next. Even without that warning, victory would have been out of reach. Now, as the Aburame and shinobi closed in on him, Nathan didn't hesitate. He activated his Mangekyo Sharingan. A ribbon of scarlet tears welled from his left eye, and in the next heartbeat, he unleashed the fabled Heaven's Control. For an instant, it felt as if he and the rest of the shinobi world existed in two separate realities, utterly disconnected. Physically, his body vanished, his breath stilled. Aburame Wing's eyes snapped open. She scanned the area, shock and uncertainty etched across her face. Just as she prepared to release the insects swarming within her body, to track him down by their swarm, Nathan reappeared, standing calm and unshaken amidst the onslaught. Nathan appeared in a blur of motion and planted himself squarely between his opponent and the fleeing figure. Aburame Wing's pupils shrank in alarm, and she blinked, too late. The instant their eyes met, Nathan activated his Sharingan illusion technique and plunged her mind into a powerful genjutsu. But Nathan didn't relax for a moment. With lightning speed, he snatched a smoldering, detonating talisman from a hidden pocket in his left palm. It was clear Wu Ying's assassination attempt had failed, and she was prepared to take him down with her. Even trapped in the illusion, she opened her eyes wide as she cast a desperate, probing glance around, trying to lure him into range of a hidden threat. Certainly, if Nathan still relied on a mere 3 Magatama Sharingan, he might have fallen for the trick. Instead, the Mangekyo Sharingan burned in his eyes, heightening everything he perceived, and his Byakugan bolstered that vision further. He could not be fooled. He let out a disdainful snort and flung the talisman. The explosive device detonated with a thunderous roar, sending a concussive wave ripping across the clearing. When the dust cleared, Nathan stood unmoved, his cloak singed, but his stance unshaken. With the lingering echoes of the blast fading, he turned his attention to the remaining root operatives. Their formation scattered, they hesitated, just long enough for Nathan to close the distance and strike back. Nathan was now absolutely certain his captive was one of Danzo's root operatives. No other shinobi would be so cold and so daring. Channeling the power of his illusion Sharingan, he wove a genjutsu around the man's mind and gently prodded him to recall every detail of the mission. Having infiltrated the memories of several root ninjas before, Nathan knew exactly how to speed things up. He slipped past the mental seals that protected sensitive secrets and sifted only through the unguarded recollections. In barely 15 minutes, the revelations were complete. He released the illusion and leaned back, sorting through the data. The shinobi before him was indeed from the Aburame clan. His name was Mu Ying, codenamed Shadowbug, and he answered directly to Root. Nathan's mind raced through the facts. Mu Ying had stolen the clan's proprietary eradication bugs, and in secret engineered a new strain called pseudo-breath bugs. True to their name, these insects could mask or alter their host's chakra signature, rendering standard detection techniques useless. What had once been dismissed as a fringe jutsu caught Danzo's eye the moment he heard of it. Through Aburame Ryoma, Danzo had personally recruited Mu Ying into his covert network, an addition that could tip the balance in any future operation. Nathan closed his eyes, weighing this newfound threat. Nathan had become the perfect spy through specialized training and a forbidden ninjutsu that let him duplicate an enemy's height, build, and facial features. The man standing before him wasn't the real Nishikawase, a Kirigakure Chunin, but Nathan's flawless impersonation. Thanks to that hidden technique, he'd seamlessly blended into the previous Kirigakure squad. As for his true face, there was no way to restore it until he assumed his next target's identity. That's why this transformation jutsu was outlawed. Completely replacing one's appearance with someone else's posed too great a security risk. Even the NBU operatives couldn't use it. Only Root under Danzo had mastered such a radical art. Nathan, however, paid little mind to the politics surrounding the ban. His sole concern was the mission at hand. Who was this group's objective this time? Were there accomplices? Everything else was irrelevant. With that single thought, he closed his eyes and sifted through the memories he had just extracted, hunting for every scrap of useful intelligence. After a brief pause, he opened his eyes, and a fierce, murderous intent gleamed in his gaze. Chapter 532, The Traitor and the Yellow Bird. Nathan exhaled slowly, forcing his racing thoughts to stillness. He had just peeled through the memories seated in Aburame's mind and unearthed the mission's true target, himself. No surprise there. The Aburame clan had zeroed in on him because of his fire release, Su-shocking technique, a power they deemed far too dangerous to ignore. Over the past few days, the Genbu division had been dissecting the raid on Ghost Island's base. Initially, Nathan's impressive combat record kept him off the suspect list. There simply wasn't enough data to tie him to the destruction. But then he unleashed his signature fire release, Su-shaking, in back-to-back engagements. Quietly, Root's intelligence operatives logged each appearance of that distinctive flame style, compiling their findings into a dossier for Danzo himself. Danzo needed no proof. Backed by a lifetime of espionage and suspicion, He wasted no time drawing a direct line between Nathan's incendiary jutsu and the dreaded copying prowess of the Sharingan. Once the connection was made, even if it was nothing more than conjecture, Nathan was branded a traitor. And in Danzo's world, allegations were all the justification anyone ever needed. Danzo never forgot a target. Once he set his sights on someone, he'd pursue them to the ends of the earth. He'd sooner strike down an innocent than let a perceived threat walk free. But aside from his ruthless temperament, it was his deep-seated hatred of the Uchiha that drove him most of all. He could barely tolerate the idea of prodigies like Nathan rising through the ranks. Every time Nathan distinguished himself in battle, it felt like a fresh wound to Danzo's pride, keeping him awake at night with restless anger. It seemed as if his every dream revolved around Nathan's downfall. So when the opportunity presented itself, Danzo wasted no time. He didn't care if his motives were misread or if innocent people got hurt. He wanted Nathan gone. Yet with the war still raging, he knew he needed to be cautious. Open assassination would risk exposing the village and overstretch his own resources. His solution? A borrowed blade, wielded by someone else. The first move in his scheme was simple. Plant false intelligence that Kirigakure was planning an attack near the Blackstone Fortress, then slip the rumor to Nara Keimitsu. Thanks to Danzo's extensive infiltration of the Ambu, Nara Keimitsu's primary source of covert information, this deception was all too easy to execute. With one well-placed lie, Danzo set the wheels in motion to eliminate Nathan without dirtying his own hands. On more than one occasion, operatives acting under the Anbu's seal conducted missions beyond the usual chain of command, and word of their activities inevitably reached Nara Keiko's ears. Danzo welcomed this. He knew full well that Nara Keimitsu wouldn't question such reports too closely. After all, the whole affair was a Kirigakure operation. He had deliberately embellished the facts to corner Keimitsu into dispatching reinforcements to the Blackstone Fortress without delay. Step 2 in his scheme was even more straightforward. Arrange for Nathan, fresh from the Blackstone outpost and intimately knowledgeable of its defenses, to join that relief force. Danzo had anticipated Nara Keimitsu's playbook. Given that the fortress was under threat, Keimitsu would want someone both loyal and experienced to go. So Danzo planted the rumors and waited. The only uncertainty was whether Nathan himself would agree to leave the main front, but to his surprise, though in hindsight, perhaps he shouldn't have been, Nathan complied without hesitation. With Nathan en route, the first 2 stages of Danzo's plan fell neatly into place. Now came the crucial third act, the true borrowed blade strike, where someone else's hand would do the killing. And that, Danzo knew, would seal the deal. After confirming that the first 2 phases of his plan had gone off without a hitch, Danzo wasted no time leaking Nathan and his team's itinerary to Kirigakure. The result was the sudden ambush they just fought through. Under ordinary circumstances, outnumbered several to 1, their escape route cut off, the mission would have ended in disaster. But Nathan wasn't ordinary. In fact, Danzo had counted on this skirmish merely to drain his chakra and tarnish his reputation. Danzo's real trump card lay hidden nearby, 3 covert route teams waiting in the shadows. Aburame was the only one aware of the broad outline. Danzo had ordered him to coordinate with these route operatives, trap Nathan's group, and finish them off. He didn't, however, know their exact positions or numbers. Worse still, Nathan uncovered another layer of Danzo's scheme deep within Aburame's fragmented memories. Among the support troops marching alongside them, there was a mole, an insider tasked with shepherding Aburame and the hidden route squads directly to Nathan. No matter which route he chose, Danzo had already laid the traps. This ambush, he realized, was just the opening act in a far larger, far deadlier performance. Haha, both our side and theirs have planted moles. Now that is truly the darkness of the ninja world. Nathan sneered as he reviewed every dossier on his team, examining backgrounds, cross-checking mission reports, replaying each moment in his mind. And yet, nothing suspicious surfaced. No odd behavior. No unexplained discrepancies. This insider was clearly a master at hiding in plain sight. Then there was Aburame Mukage, who'd blown himself up the moment he sparred with command. It was all too obvious. Danzo had dispatched his elite operatives this time. What Nathan hadn't anticipated, however, was that the mole possessed the Byakugan. With a single glance, they'd pinpointed Aburame Shadow among a crowd of mist ninjas, and that one slip had unraveled the entire operation. And then it hit him. There wasn't a single Hyuga clan shinobi on this mission. A deliberate move by Danzo? If so, his foresight ran deeper than Nathan had ever imagined. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. Danzo's brilliance was only matched by his ruthlessness. That kind of man deserved to die. Nathan squirmed under the snake's baleful glare and decided he'd had enough. He opened his dimensional panel and checked the evolution meter on his Mangekyo Sharingan. 17,296 out of 50,000. He had intended to bide his time until his Sharingan fully matured into the eternal Mangekyo before confronting Danzo, but now he couldn't wait any longer. He would have to accelerate his plans. Reviewing every scrap of intel he'd gathered on Danzo, Nathan reminded himself that, a decade ago, Danzo was far less formidable. Back then, he hadn't yet grafted Hashirama's cells to sustain his body, and, crucially, he lacked the arm bristling with stolen Sharingan eyes. Without that arsenal, Danzo couldn't rely on repeated Izanagi to rewrite reality in his favor. All Nathan had to worry about was the single sealed Sharingan in Danzo's right eye, bandaged and protected by powerful sealing jutsu, but still vulnerable. Confident that his current strength outmatched Danzo's past self, Nathan faced one final hurdle: finding him. Locating Danzo in this era would be the real test. But with his plan set, Nathan steeled himself for the challenge ahead. Having spent years lurking in the shadows, Danzo hid his lair with ruthless precision. So well, in fact, that even the venerable third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, could never pinpoint it. Nathan, however, felt no sense of urgency. With the war now over and shinobi streaming back into the village hidden in the leaves, it was only a matter of time before he and his quarry crossed paths. And when that moment came, he would strike without hesitation. Until then, Nathan's cold eyes locked onto the Aburame ninja standing before him. With a flick of his wrist, he sent a kunai flying. The blade sliced cleanly across the man's throat, and within heartbeats, life drained from his eyes. Nathan crouched, watching until he was certain the target was dead. Then he folded his hands into the next set of seals and called out, fire-style, scorching ash technique. A swirling orb of flame blossomed in his palm before surging forward in a roaring wave. In seconds, the ninja, and every insect that had nested in his flesh, was reduced to blackened ash, drifting into the night air like a final, silent testament. Chapter 533. Search. A cool breeze swept through the forest, sending ash and embers dancing in the air. Danzo's prize tool lay ruined at Nathan's feet. A small victory, but only the first step. 3 more root teams were still out there, dispatched by Danzo to hunt him down. He might be unable to confront Danzo directly just yet, but that wouldn't stop him from sabotaging the shinobi sent in the organization's place. After all, tools like those didn't come cheap, and replacing them would be a headache for Danzo. Nathan would relish every bit of trouble he could cause. Pinpointing the enemy's 3 teams shouldn't be a problem. They'd be acting as Oriole messengers, and their routes would inevitably circle the battlefield. With his current flight speed and the extra edge of his Byakugan, Nathan could scour the skies until he uncovered their positions. Narrowing down their exact locations would be easy. Nathan raised his hand, forming the familiar seal. Wind release, wind wings. At once, a pair of translucent, cyan-tinted chakra wings materialized on his back, propelling him upward into the canopy. From this vantage point, the forest stretched out below like a living map. Split second by split second, Nathan scanned every clearing, every hidden thicket. His Byakugan lens pierced through the foliage and briars, hunting for any sign of the root teams. Whether moving in squads or gliding solo, they would leave a faint chakra signature, one he would not miss. As he soared higher, the wind stoked his resolve. Finding and disrupting each of those teams meant weakening Danzo's grip on the battlefield, and inching one step closer to the answers he craved. With his wings unfurled and his vision sharp, Nathan vanished into the swirling mist of the forest, determined to root out every last adversary sent his way. Immediately afterward, Nathan formed another hand seal and unleashed the ninjutsu, Chakra Hagoromo. A pale blue aura flooded his body, draping him in what looked like a flowing spiritual robe and giving him a distinctly otherworldly air. Nathan couldn't help but think that if he wandered into the realm of immortal cultivators now, they'd surely bow and hail him as an immortal master. He paused to reflect. Could the ninja world itself hold a path to immortality? Perhaps, he mused, once I've settled my current troubles, I'll pursue that immortal path. Nathan never passed up any method that might boost his strength. In his view, cultivation was the world's native road to transcendence, while chakra, gifted by 2 alien powers, was only an added advantage. Even his Uchiha bloodline inched into this foreign power. If he truly wanted to smash through his lineage's limits and climb to new heights, he needed to combine paths. Fortunately, chakra and cultivation weren't incompatible. In fact, magic chakra could stand toe-to-toe with the mightiest yin-yang release. Nathan refused to give up now that he possessed this power. But first, he had to deal with those secret aureole agents. Determination flared in his chest as he spread his wings and surged into the sky. In the blink of an eye, he reached nearly 200 meters per second. Even with the chakra feather shielding him, the headwind was brutal, forcing him to squint against the gale. He made a mental note. Next time, he'd have to invest some chakra to upgrade the chakra feather's defenses. Moments later, Nathan swooped back toward the forest battlefield, where the clash between Konoha's Shinobi and the Mist Warriors still raged. Rather than dive straight into a search for the root operatives, he tapped into the mind transmission technique to coordinate with his 3 shadow clones. Each clone was already hard at work on the front lines, shoring up Konoha's defenses and holding back the Mist Ninja's siege. With their combined efforts, Nathan knew they had a better chance of locating and neutralizing the hidden aureole agents and turning the tide of this chaotic battle. Nathan's heart sank as he watched his shadow clones struggling on the rear flank. The Kirigakure Jonin had zeroed in on them, forcing every clone to fight for its life, and they couldn't hold out much longer. Meanwhile, the lone shadow clone that had slipped away to the Blackstone stronghold encountered no trouble. It arrived 10 minutes ago and immediately found Sano Nobuhisa. As soon as Nathan's clone relayed the situation on the battlefield, Sano sprang into action, organizing his men and dispatching reinforcements without hesitation. If the Konoha shinobi at the front could just buy a little more time, help from the Blackstone stronghold would arrive in under 30 minutes. Nathan couldn't help but smirk at the irony. They had set out to reinforce Blackstone, and now Blackstone was racing to reinforce them. Still, this twist played to their advantage. By drawing Kirigakure forces into a pitched battle here, they'd effectively cleared the way around the stronghold, reducing the likelihood of future raids. And once this fight was over, Nathan could finally train in relative peace, free from the constant threat of enemy interference. A wave of relief and determination washed over him as he refocused on the battlefield. Only a little longer now. Once Nathan confirmed the front line was secure, he launched a full area scan. Centering his focus on the battlefield, he activated his Byakugan and swept the perimeter with ease. In less than 2 minutes, he pinpointed a squad of root ninjas hiding roughly 700 meters to the west. Though their concealment was nearly flawless, his clairvoyant sight revealed every detail. Cut off from direct view of the battle, they'd resorted to covert jutsu and summoned beasts to monitor the fight, tactics that would soon prove useless. With a single thought, Nathan flexed his wings and vaulted into the air. In the blink of an eye, he hovered above their hidden position, ready to strike. Nathan moved before they could even draw a breath. With a single decisive hand seal, he unleashed Fire Release, Fireball technique. A colossal sphere of flame hurtled into the thicket where the root operatives lay hidden. They never expected to be discovered so swiftly, nor to be struck so ruthlessly. In an instant, 3 of them were incinerated, their bodies reduced to smoldering ash. Unfazed by the shocked expressions of the survivors, Nathan wove his hands again, summoning an even larger inferno. Fire Release, Great Fireball technique. The forest air trembled as the second blaze engulfed the clearing, leaving 3 more operatives blackened and still. The remaining 9 root ninjas scattered, melting into the shadows beyond the blast radius. But they were far from defeated. From amid the trees, a barrage of kunai and shuriken whistled through the air. each blade marked with poison and explosive tags. Nathan's keen eyes noted the deadly enhancements in an instant. Without hesitation, he summoned a pair of translucent chakra wings, springing backward and spiraling away from the flying weapons. As the muttered clangs of metal on bark faded, Nathan sensed movement at the edge of his vision. He caught the flicker of a figure slipping through the undergrowth, a silent silhouette that hadn't joined the initial attack. His heart quickened. Who else was out here in the depths of the forest, and what was their purpose? Nathan's eyes narrowed as his opponent formed a series of hand seals, preparing a new ninjutsu. For some reason, the technique felt eerily familiar. Instantly alert, Nathan spread his wings and surged backward, increasing the distance between them. A piercing whistle tore through the air. In an instant, pain exploded in Nathan's ears, and blood trickled down the sides of his head. His flight staggered, wings flapping wildly, but he managed to steady himself before crashing. It finally clicked. This was a soundwave ninjutsu. The root ninja had clearly done his homework. He knew Nathan's past defeats all stemmed from sonic attacks, so he'd sought out this very technique specifically to exploit that weakness. If Nathan had been any closer, the unexpected blast could have caused severe injury. Maybe even forced him to trigger his Heaven's Guard just to ward off the debilitating effects. Fortunately, the ninja's hasty execution meant he never unleashed the jutsu at full power, and Nathan avoided what could have been a disastrous setback. Well, you can't really blame him for being curt, Nathan thought, sizing up his opponent's stance. In a single fluid motion, he raised his hands, wove the necessary seals, and unleashed his ninjutsu. Fire style, Sushoku Jutsu. A roaring wall of flame burst forth, crackling with scorching heat as it surged toward its target. Chapter 534. Act with caution, puff. A fireball materialized out of thin air, hurtling toward the root ninja as he formed hand seals to launch a powerful sonic ninjutsu. In the next instant, the ninja sprung forward, narrowly evading the blast of Nathan's fire style, Sushoku Jutsu. Nathan let out a soft humph and readied another seal. But before his fingers even brushed together, his acute chakra sense picked up an additional surge of fire energy in the air. "What?" he murmured, frowning. The signature heat and roar of the jutsu were all too familiar. In a flash, Nathan realized he was facing his own technique. Someone had stolen his fire style, Sushoku Jutsu, and turned it back on him. He pivoted his gaze toward a large tree not far off and spotted a root ninja crouched behind it, frantically shaping hand seals. The enemy had mirrored Nathan's move. Without a moment's hesitation, Nathan extended his wings and launched himself skyward, putting as much distance as possible between himself and the hidden assailant. No sooner had he cleared the danger zone than a towering inferno roared to life on the ground below, engulfing the spot where he had just stood. Flames crackled and roared, sending waves of searing heat through the clearing. From his vantage point in the air, Nathan's eyes narrowed. This attack might have missed him for now, but the imitation jutsu proved his opponent was both cunning and well-prepared. He would need to stay sharp, act with caution. Heat radiated all around Nathan, just a hair's breadth slower, and he'd be swallowed by the flames. A fierce grin split his face. He seized the moment. Fingers darting into a hand seal, Nathan called forth wind style, wind blade. In an instant, a meter-long, translucent blade of cutting air hurtled toward the root ninja, crouched behind a tree. Startled, the ninja leaped clear as the razor-sharp gust sliced through the trunk, bisecting it with ease. The massive tree toppled, crashing into its smaller neighbors and sending a shower of branches and leaves scattering. Nearby root ninjas scrambled desperately to avoid the wreckage. Nathan's eyes gleamed. Perfect opening. He raised his hand again, palms burning with chakra, and molded the final seal. Fire style, Phoenix fire technique. With a roar like a dying bird, a torrent of blue-red flames erupted from his palms, racing toward his stunned foes. In an instant, dozens of fireballs erupted from Nathan's palms, arching upward like fiery phoenix petals before hurtling toward the collapsing giant tree. The impact turned its trunk into an inferno, and the flames leaped outward, igniting the surrounding timber. Hidden among the undergrowth, the low-rank shinobi beneath that tree, and several others in nearby groves, found themselves trapped in the blaze. Ninjas, after all, are masters of offense but fragile in defense. Once engulfed by a large fire, even a single spark can prove fatal. Seizing the opportunity, Nathan formed hand seals and called forth a powerful jutsu, wind style. Great breakthrough. A roaring gale surged from his mouth, fanning the flames into a ravenous wildfire. The combined fury of wind and fire transformed the forest floor into a rolling sea of ember and smoke. An ordinary shinobi caught in such devastation would have been in utter disarray. But these root-level operatives were anything but ordinary. They operated with precise coordination, each member executing a carefully assigned role, even as the inferno surged around them. Nathan barely had time to react before 5 shinobi descended on him, their goal clear: distract him and bind his chakra so he couldn't unleash more havoc. As they pressed in, another quartet of ninja quickly formed hand seals. With a synchronized breath, they wove a towering water release technique. In moments, immense clouds of vapor coalesced overhead, then hissed downward in 4 roaring torrents, each aimed at the raging sea of fire Nathan had unleashed. Fire and water are opposites. The instant the water jutsu struck the flames, the battle of elements began. Although the wildfire Nathan had summoned was vast, it lacked the refined strength of a true ninjutsu. The shinobi's water release, though smaller in scale, carried the precision and power of their training, and it prevailed. Within heartbeats, the bulk of the inferno collapsed into steam, leaving only smoldering embers and wisps of black smoke in isolated pockets. Freed from their distraction, the root operatives lunged again, blades flicking in the remaining haze. Nathan slid beneath one sweeping strike and sidestepped another, his senses honed after years of combat. When the last ninja attack fell short, he stepped back and surveyed the forest below. Where once trees stood aflame, every trunk and branch was now slick with water. Even the scorched remains, glowing faintly in the twilight, were damp enough to resist reigniting. For the moment at least, the woodland lay quiet, and Nathan allowed himself a grim nod of satisfaction. The fire could trouble no one here again. Nathan felt a twinge of regret, but quickly banished it, lifting his gaze to the 9 remaining root shinobi below. With his Byakugan active, he could read each of their chakra reserves as if they were laid bare. 2 were full jonin, 6 special jonin, and 1 a lone chunin. On sheer power alone, he'd have no trouble besting them. Yet these were root operatives, experts in concealment and subterfuge, so their true capabilities went far beyond what chakra readings revealed. Anyone daring enough to take him on had undoubtedly prepared multiple contingencies. His Byakugan had given him the drop on them and probably neutralized some of their defenses, but there were surely more tricks up their sleeves. He refused to descend into a trap by engaging in close quarters. It was far safer to burn a little extra chakra, stay aloft, and pick them off from above than to risk walking into their ambush. Nathan recalled the last root operative he'd faced, an expert in sonic ninjutsu, and knew these enemies were equally well prepared. A head-on approach would be suicide. He needed to strike from range. As for his dwindling chakra, that wasn't a problem. Dozens of mist ninjas were spread across the battlefield, ready to reinforce him at a moment's notice. With their support, he was certain he could take down this squad. Silently, Nathan measured his distance and launched his assault. In moments, he seemed to transform into an unrelenting jutsu machine. Fireballs, wind blades, and shadow clones burst from his fingertips in rapid succession, forcing several root ninjas into full retreat. Yet he only sneered at their flight. "Amateur hour," he muttered. Most shinobi might underestimate root operatives, but Nathan had both Sharingan and Byakugan to guide his strikes. He dictated the rhythm of battle so flawlessly that his foes barely had an opening to respond. Still, these were root ninjas, lethal, highly trained assassins who could not be dismissed so easily. Nathan paused to assess his opponents. He knew that if they truly wanted to fight back, they'd exploit anything, even human shields, to carve out an opening. Those branded as expendable wouldn't dare complain. Yet as his ninjutsu strikes rained down, his foes dodged and weaved, clutching at life with an almost excessive caution. That wasn't the fearless-in-the-face-of-death mentality he'd been warned about. Their evasive dance was clearly a feint, meant to lull him into overconfidence and present the perfect moment for a single, lethal blow. Fortunately, Nathan had anticipated exactly this. He refused to close the distance. instead relying on his ranged techniques to keep them off balance. From safety, he unleashed wave after wave of chakra blasts, each attack under his complete control. He saw no need to call out their deception. If they wanted to make a game of it, he was more than willing to participate, as long as he walked away unscathed. Chapter 535. Well-prepared minutes crawled by, each one stretching longer than the last. After 5 or 6 of them had passed without Nathan showing any weakness, the remaining root ninjas exchanged tense glances. They'd been feigning hesitation, pretending they couldn't overcome him, but if they let Nathan draw bombs on them, they really would stand no chance. They had to strike now, while they were still at their peak. Their first move advantage was gone, and 3 comrades lay dead. Many of their planned techniques were already expended. The few backups they retained felt like grasping at straws. Still, desperation forced them to make every last effort. Plan C, barked the apparent leader. At his command, the 4 ninjas in the clearing snapped to attention, each sliding into a precise stance. In perfect unison, they wove 3 swift hand seals. At once, thick tendrils of inky chakra surged up from their bodies, coalescing into 4 jet-black pillars of light that shot toward the sky. Nathan's gaze hardened. Plan C was in motion, and the real battle was about to begin. If you looked closely, you could still make out faint sealing runes drifting around the column of light. In an instant, they unfurled outward, converging into the edges of a giant cube, an invisible cage designed to trap Nathan inside. He'd noticed those 4 attendants hovering nearby from the start. In the last few minutes, he'd singled them out with targeted attacks, more dangerous than anything he'd done so far. Still, they never flinched, and every time he struck, other shinobi slipped in to bolster their defenses. Nathan realized they were no ordinary guards. Now, without warning, the 4 had begun weaving a strange sealing barrier. Though the cage hadn't snapped shut yet, Nathan already felt its weight press on his body and mind. There was no time to debate. He flexed his wings and prepared to whip away before the final wall formed. But the shinobi protecting the array were ready. The moment he turned, a volley of vacuum projectiles screamed toward him so fast he barely managed to twist his head aside. "Wind style, vacuum jade," someone called out. Nathan braced himself against the onslaught, wings beating furiously to evade the deadly darts, and buy enough time to shatter the barrier before it could imprison him completely. In Danzo's hands, this technique is powerful enough to wound even Sasuke with his Mangekyo Sharingan activated. Right now, Nathan is only holding the 3 Magatama form, and the only reason he can evade these attacks is that his assailant is a special root jonin. No ordinary shinobi could pull this off. Swish, 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 3 vacuum-charged projectiles zip past his ears. Nathan exhales, ready to put distance between them. But before he can lift off again, a shuttle-shaped bird materializes out of thin air and dives toward him like a bolt of lightning. Its razor-sharp beak is aimed straight for his heart. In midair, the bird is nearly silent, and its timing is perfect. Any other opponent might have been pierced through. But Nathan's white eyes, the sensory byproduct of his own unique techniques, flare to life the instant the creature appears behind him. He pivots on a bolt of chakra, draws a single chakra scalpel, and with one swift, downward stroke, severs the bird's head clean from its body. A high-pitched screech rips from the bird's severed neck. At the same moment, a pained cry echoes up from the root chunin hiding below in the forest. With the threat neutralized for the moment, Nathan glances down to assess the newcomer and to prepare for whatever comes next. Using his Byakugan, Nathan immediately realized that the strange beast before him was the very summon his opponent had just called forth. From the bird's uncanny precision in striking, it was clear that a secret technique had been used to seize temporary control of its body. There was simply no other explanation. Of course, when Nathan's blade lopped off the creature's head, that control unleashed a fierce backlash on whoever was puppeteering it. Ut for the root operatives, that cost had been deemed acceptable. Nathan scanned his surroundings. In the few seconds he'd spent dispatching the summon, 4 separate beams of light had converged into one luminous curtain, snapping shut as a complete sealing barrier. The moment it closed around him, an oppressive weight pressed down on both his body and his mind. He knew all too well that chakra, Ninja power itself depends on the harmony of flesh and spirit. Once those foundations are suppressed, no technique, however advanced, can be drawn upon. The shinobi is rendered powerless. Nathan felt it the moment the battle began. Any attempt to mold chakra now would be at least 10 times harder than before. His very life force seemed to rebel under some invisible pressure. Root must have realized that their ordinary barrier couldn't hold him, so they deployed a special sealing jutsu, one keyed specifically to him. No wonder they called these techniques the pinnacle of shinobi power. He barely had time to register the thought before 4 spectral chains, each etched with sealing talismans, shot out from the hands of the root operatives forming the barrier. They wrapped around his limbs and torso, their tips sinking into his flesh with a hiss. Nathan clenched his teeth, a sharp stab of pain flaring through him. His breath hitched. With great effort, he drew in a slow, steady inhale and let it out just as deliberately. He refused to let the chains or the pressure on his chakra unsettle him. As he exhaled, his gaze flicked toward a great oak at the edge of the clearing. Nestled in its highest branches was a strange, sloth-like spirit beast, its half-closed eyes lazily tracking the skirmish below. Root's surveillance animal, he'd seen these beasts before, guarding their main battlefront. Now it served as an extra set of eyes on him. Nathan's jaw set. If they thought they could pin him here with seals and unseen watchers, they'd badly underestimated his resolve. Obviously, this was their contingency plan. If they failed, every detail of Nathan's battle would be recorded by the summoned beast and relayed straight back to Root headquarters. That's why he hadn't struggled the moment those chains wrapped around him. Had he tried, he could have activated his Mangekyo Sharingan, unleashed the Tianjiu technique, and slipped free before the barrier closed. But he stayed still. He refused to expose his trump card and tipped Danzo off before the real fight even began. Besides, Nathan had already analyzed this sealing barrier down to its last flaw. He was confident he could endure whatever came next. If things went south, he'd still use the Mangekyo Sharingan without a second thought. No technique was worth more than his life. He let his gaze fall away from the chain's crushing grip and settled it on the 4 root ninjas sustaining the barrier. Calmly, he sized them up, every muscle ready for the storm to come. Nathan activated his Byakugan and watched in growing astonishment as the 4 shinobi who had erected the barrier around him began to wither before his eyes. Their life energy was draining away at an alarming pace, each of them visibly aging, skin tightening over gaunt features, hair paling to ghostly white. Clearly, maintaining this sealing jutsu was no small feat. But what puzzled Nathan most was the fear and shock etched into their expressions. They were the ones who'd cast the technique. They'd have calculated its toll on their vitality. Why, then, did it seem to be overwhelming them? He studied them carefully. Sweat beaded on their brows, and every muscle in their bodies strained as though they'd been hit by a surprise assault. It made no sense. The very method they'd chosen was supposed to be within their limits. He closed his eyes and centered his awareness, tracing the flow of chakra through the heavy iron chains binding him to the ground. Slowly, quietly, he felt the subtle tug of energy, not just into the barrier but away from his own reserves, siphoned off through the chains themselves. A few steady breaths later, he opened his eyes, clarity shining in their pale depths. The exhaustion afflicting his captors wasn't just from sustaining the seal. Something about these chains was leeching their strength directly. Their jutsu was backfiring. Nathan's lips curved into the faintest smile. Now that he knew the truth, he could turn their desperation to his advantage and break free. Chapter 536, Disintegration. To Nathan, the transparent chains binding him to the 4 root ninjas felt like the 2 pans of a cosmic scale, with him tipping one end and all 4 of them on the other. The weight balancing those pans was neither gold nor silver, but the combined force of spirit and body. Even without much thought, Nathan could tell that, put together, their vitality and strength paled against his own. Surprise flickered across the faces of the 4 assailants. According to every record he'd studied, once root ninjas resorted to this life-or-death sealing technique, their quarry was immediately stamped down, unless it managed to vanish. Yet here he was, straining at his bonds, still very much capable of counterattack. Worse for them, the life drain that should have been sapping Nathan's power was bleeding out at a much faster rate from the four of them instead. They shared frantic glances. This seal couldn't hold for long if their own energy ebbed away so quickly. Without a word, the leader of the quartet flicked his eyes toward 5 more root ninjas stationed on the fringe of the clearing, a silent summons. The others understood immediately. From beneath their sleeves, the 5 stepped forward in unison and produced identical talismans. With a swift, practiced motion, they activated each charm, pressing them against their chests until the paper glowed and dissolved into their robes. Energetic runes pulsed across their bodies, preparing to reinforce the seal and extinguish Nathan's resistance before he could break free. Nathan's jaw tensed as he felt the surge of power against him. The battle for his very life had entered its next, most perilous phase. Nathan held his breath as the 5 root ninjas slipped past the barrier's edge and into its depths. From all directions, a flurry of kunai whistled toward him. Swoosh, 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 forcing him to struggle to keep his airborne stance, let alone dodge each blade. With no time to waste, he drew his longsword in a single fluid motion and brought it down. Metal rang against metal, ding, 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 as he cleaved several kunai in midair. The attacker's eyes flickered with surprise, then hardened with resolve. They melted into the shadows outside the barrier's walls, only to reemerge moments later, launching another volley of kunai from new angles. Nathan's Sharingan burned in his irises, while his hidden Byakugan scanned every missile. He recognized the telltale gleam of poison on some kunai and the faint circuitry of explosive tags on others. There could be no head-on clash. Instead, he angled his blade to intercept the deadliest threats, letting lighter projectiles harmlessly spray past him, and prepared to turn their own stratagem against them. Nathan's mind raced as he fended off the poisonous kunai with a swift arc of his sword. He beat his wings and descended, deliberately losing altitude until he hit solid ground. The moment he dispelled his wind wings technique, a wave of relief washed over him. His body felt looser, and the strain of molding chakra eased noticeably. Maintaining wind wings was essentially like running a ninjutsu at full throttle, and under normal conditions, Nathan's chakra reserves were more than sufficient. But here, trapped within the ceiling barrier, every ounce of chakra mattered. Even a momentary lapse in concentration would let tension slip away and leave him vulnerable. His thoughts barely settled when 5 root operatives burst from the underbrush, weapons drawn. They meant to swarm and kill him while his guard was down. Nathan met their charge without hesitation. Channeling chakra into his nerves, he unleashed lightning release, lightning body. Crackling arcs of electricity rippled across his skin, sharpening his speed and reflexes in an instant. In that electric surge, Nathan's eyes glinted with renewed determination. He was ready for whatever came next. Nathan's lightning release, lightning body, was only at level 1, so its support was minimal. But even a small advantage was still an advantage, and he wasn't about to spit it out. Sparks crackling around his limbs, he lunged at the weakest of the group, the root chunin, in hopes of taking him out first. The barrier's sealing effect, however, sapped his speed. Though the root chunin froze in surprise, Nathan's momentary hesitation gave the other 4 assailants their opening, especially the 2 true jonin, whose attacks came with honed precision and ruthless intent. One jonin hurled a kunai aimed straight for Nathan's heart, while the other swept in at his side, blade leveled to slit his throat. No one stepped in to shield the root chunin. Their single goal was to eliminate Nathan. Sensing the mortal danger, Nathan abandoned his own attack. He dropped low, letting the first kunai whistle overhead, then brought his knife up with a sharp arc to intercept the second, which was driving straight for his neck. A crisp clash of steel rang out. Ding! Nathan sprang into action, sweeping his arm to knock the kunai aside just as it whistled toward him. He rolled through the air and watched, out of the corner of his eye, the root special jonin down the field, parting his lips to unleash a second vacuum bullet in Nathan's direction. Nathan tensed for the impact, then twisted away at the last moment, letting the gust of razor-sharp air roar harmlessly past him. No sooner had he evaded that attack than 2 more blades of compressed wind shot toward him in quick succession. He ducked, weaved, and sprinted, narrowly dodging the third and fourth vacuum bullets. By the time the seventh had thundered past, the Root Jonin paused, panting and lowering his arms. Nathan seized the moment to catch his breath, only to be jarred by a piercing whistle that struck his ears like a physical blow. He staggered and nearly pitched forward, the aftermath of a soundwave ninjutsu unleashed at point-blank range. Even though he'd spotted the seal forming through his Byakugan and reinforced his defenses with chakra, the technique's raw power hurtled through his guard and knocked him off balance. Before Nathan could fully recover, 4 more Root Shinobi charged in, their blades flashing. Metal clanged against metal as Nathan spun the Sharingan and Byakugan at once, tracking all 5 opponents in a dizzying, deadly dance. Nathan's wounds ran deep, and he was clearly at a disadvantage, but he wasn't going to die. In fact, as the skirmish dragged on, the 5 Root Shinobi grew more terrified and reckless by the second. Their one tether to Nathan's containment was the ceiling barrier maintained by 4 of their comrades, and those guards were rapidly weakening. With each passing moment, the barrier's hold slackened, and with it, Nathan's ability to fight back was restored. At first, he hadn't even had enough chakra to summon the instant sword technique. But as the barrier's pressure eased, chakra flooded his limbs once more, and in an instant, he unleashed the skill that had eluded him. Before the Root operatives could react, one of their number, the weakest Chunin, lay dead at Nathan's feet. That single kill sent them into a frenzy. They threw caution to the wind, using their own teammates as bait, and even preparing suicide charges in the hopes of bringing Nathan down with them. They underestimated him. Thanks to the unblinking clarity of his Byakugan and the predictive insight of his Sharingan, every desperate lunge and feint was laid bare before him. Unfazed by their fanatical, self-sacrificial tactics, preferring to gash themselves 1,000 times if it meant cutting him 800, Nathan turned their fury back upon them. With precise, merciless strikes, he shattered their ranks and exacted a heavy toll. By the time the dust settled, only Nathan stood unbroken amid the ruin he had made. Nathan's advantage was growing by the second. The 2 Root ninjas, specialists in sealing, could no longer stand it. They broke off the fight, quickly formed hand seals, and unleashed 2 powerful jutsu in tandem. One ninja expelled a colossal torrent of water, flooding the entire interior of the barrier. At that very moment, the other channeled lightning, sending a crackling bolt straight into the rising waters. Instantly, the chamber became a roiling storm of electricity. Nathan, caught at the epicenter, felt every nerve in his body tingle with raw power. His hair shot straight up, the tips of his skin smoldered with faint charred marks, and wisps of green-tinged smoke curled around him, carrying the acrid scent of seared flesh. Despite the savage onslaught, Nathan showed no fear, only a slow, confident smile. As the water and lightning collided, the 2 ninjas had unwittingly broken the 4 sealing chains that had bound his mind and body. That moment laid bare the fatal flaw in their barrier technique. The sealing barrier Nathan had been trapped in was brutally effective, but its power came at a steep price. Ninjutsu always siphons the caster's life energy, and the heavier the chakra fluctuations, the greater the toll. That's why the Root operatives laying siege around him had kept their jutsu use to a minimum. But when 2 of them finally decided to unleash a massive spell, they told themselves that any further delay would only give Nathan a chance to escape. Even so, they expected the barrier to hold for at least a few more strikes before finally collapsing. They were dead wrong. The moment the jutsu hit, the seal overtaxed its 4 maintainers, draining every last ounce of their vitality. In an instant, the barrier dissolved, and Nathan was free. Chapter 537. Using your opponent's trick. Nathan stood his ground, feeling his chakra surge back to life. He cracked his neck and let a mocking grin slip across his face as he sized up the 4 Root ninjas circling him. He lifted his foot, ready to advance, when a sudden, searing pain stopped him in his tracks. He saw the lightning-charred flesh on his torso already knitting itself back to unblemished skin. With the sealing barrier's dampening effect gone, his body's formidable regenerative powers had kicked in, but barely enough time had passed for a full recovery. 19 points in Constitution still isn't enough, he muttered darkly. Without hesitation, he he formed a crisp hand seal and unleashed an A-rank medical ninjutsu, the immortal palm technique. He condensed a surge of pure yang chakra in his palm and drove it into his chest. A radiant wave of energy pulsed outward, stitching torn tissue and restoring his strength in an instant. As the last echoes of pain faded, Nathan lifted his head and met his opponent's wary gazes. The battle had shifted. Now it was his turn to strike. Nathan didn't flinch. At level 8, on the brink of level 9, the Palm Immortal technique, paired with his impressive 19-point constitution, performed much like a miracle drug. Though his earlier wounds had appeared grievous, none had struck his vital organs, so his body was repairing itself at an astonishing pace. Feeling the surge of renewed strength, Nathan fixed his cold gaze on the 4 root ninjas who had him surrounded. "All right," he said softly, "your turn." His tone was casual, almost bored, but the lethal intent behind his words was crystal clear. An ordinary person, or even a freshly graduated academy ninja, would hear that voice and feel their limbs go limp, their will to fight evaporate. They'd collapse, become easy prey. But these weren't greenhorns. Each of these root operatives had endured merciless training, forging an ironclad spirit. Nathan's aura did nothing to shake them. No sooner had Nathan spoken than all 4 lunged at once, vanishing into motion. Their strikes came fast and fierce, but Nathan was ready. His injuries mended, his resolve sharpened, he met their assault head-on, fully healed and more determined than ever. Since they no longer had to worry about shattering the seal barrier, the Jonin wasted no time resorting to ninjutsu. The first to strike was a root Jonin who had just finished his hand seals for a lightning technique. He thrust his fingers forward, and in an instant, a jagged bolt of lightning ripped through the air toward Nathan. Its speed was such that only the most elite shinobi could hope to react in time. But for Nathan, this was child's play. Even when the barrier had previously suppressed him, his Sharingan had tracked attacks of this caliber without difficulty. Now, unencumbered, he watched the lightning bolt streak toward him with absolute clarity. A metallic ring rang out as Nathan drew his sword. A faint emerald glow burst to life around him as he activated the instant sword technique, his speed skyrocketing. The lightning bolt streaked past the spot where he'd just stood, missing by inches. In the next heartbeat, Nathan reappeared at the Jonin's side. His sword flashed in a lethal arc, targeting the Jonin's neck. Sensing imminent danger, the root Jonin ducked and rolled away, narrowly escaping the blade's edge. Nathan didn't flinch as the kunai sailed from the root Jonin's hidden sleeve, aiming squarely for his midsection. In the next instant, the blade tore through the space where his body had been, yet he felt no impact. A faint afterimage shimmered in the air, betraying the true target, a simple clone. Nathan had slipped away the moment the kunai was launched. Before his attacker could react, Nathan reappeared behind the other root Jonin, the specialist in soundwave ninjutsu. That second Jonin had already begun forming hand seals, preparing the very technique he had hoped to unleash in tandem with his comrade's attack. But with the seals that once held Nathan's pow finally broken, he moved so swiftly they never even had a chance to cooperate. Now, the soundwave ninja froze for an instant, eyes widening at the gleam of Nathan's unsheathed sword. With a swift step back, just enough to cross the edge of a fatal strike, he finished his seals and unleashed a potent sound-based jutsu, waves of concussive energy rippling outward. Nathan halted his advance, sword raised. The crackling air between them bore witness to the sudden shift in momentum, and to Nathan's only hesitation of the fight so far. Nathan knew exactly what his opponent was trying to do: force a mutual kill, or at the very least, maim him severely. The catch was that the powerful ninjutsu the enemy was preparing would backfire on its caster, and if the other 2 root operatives jumped in while it rebounded, Nathan would be cornered. He hesitated for less than a heartbeat, then made his move. Keeping his feet in constant motion, he lunged forward and swung his knife in a clean, upward arc at the ninja before him. Swish! The blade sang as it tore through flesh and muscle. In an instant, the man's chest split open in a deep, ragged gash, ribs exposed, blood spraying like a crimson fountain. The wounded ninja's face drained of all color, but he never broke his chant. Under Nathan's steady gaze, the man's mouth opened and a faint ripple of energy formed in the air. Then, without warning, an invisible shockwave burst forth. Nathan felt it slam into him, his internal organs clenching in agonized convulsion. His knees buckled, and his vision flared white. Infrasound, he managed to choke out, teeth gritted against the pain. And in that moment, Nathan saw through the facade of the enemy's jutsu, recognizing its true, devastating power. Nathan's escape wasn't due to lightning-quick reflexes alone, but rather the hard lesson he'd learned after his last encounter with a mist ninja. Remembering that defeat, he'd been instinctively on guard the moment he sensed the enemy shaping a sonic ninjutsu. To his relief, that vigilance, and the chakra he'd just concentrated in his chest, kept the attack from inflicting serious harm. After all, every ninjutsu, no matter how spectacular, still depends on chakra. By pooling his reserves, Nathan blunted the brunt of the shockwave even without deploying a full counter-jutsu. Though his current chakra levels were barely a fifth of what he boasted in his prime, he still carried over 25,000 chakra points, enough to make a single taijutsu strike feel like 10. Thanks to that reserve, he'd weathered the sonic blast with only minor bruising and could still stand and fight. In situations like this, sheer stamina often proved as powerful as any secret technique, and for now, Nathan had more than enough. At the very instant the two root ninjas struck from behind, Nathan rolled aside without breaking a sweat, narrowly evading their sneak attack. Had they connected, his situation would have been dire, but thanks to his Byakugan, he'd already seen every muscle twitch before they even moved. As they recovered from their failed ambush and braced to trade blows, Nathan seized the opening and countered with brutal precision. The outcome was decisive. One of the root operatives now lay incapacitated, while Nathan himself only bore a few superficial cuts, wounds that were already knitting closed as he stood triumphant on the battlefield. Chapter 538, Recognition. Nathan's comrades lay motionless, gravely wounded. The three remaining root ninjas showed no mercy. Seizing on his deteriorating condition, they launched a second, more deadly volley of shuriken. Shoo-shoo, steel missiles whistled toward him. Nathan curled a wry smile. So cold-blooded, he muttered, his Sharingan flaring to life. Instantly, he tracked each blade's trajectory and flicked a matching number of shuriken back into the onslaught, intercepting their attack before it could reach him. A flash of emerald light signaled his next move. Employing the instant sword technique, Nathan surged forward in a blur of motion. He mentally cataloged his opponents, two true jonin, one specializing in lightning release, the other mastering water release, and a special jonin whose expertise lay in wind-style evasive maneuvers. Assessing their stances and elemental affinities, he crafted a counter-strategy on the fly. The air crackled with chakra as steel rang against steel. Nathan met each opponent head-on, his blade weaving arcs of green energy through the dim light. Sparks flew from every clash, chakra swirling around them in violent gusts. In that moment, Nathan recognized the true challenge before him, and the fierce battle of four shinobi ignited without warning. Nathan squared off against the three root operatives. Their battle shifted constantly, sometimes erupting into brutal close-quarters combat, sometimes devolving into long-range ninjutsu duels, and at other times testing raw physical prowess. None of them would yield an inch. These root agents had squeezed every drop of potential from their bodies, accelerating their growth, but in doing so had sacrificed any chance of truly breaking through their limits. Still, they were undeniably top-tier fighters, their battle-hardened experience far exceeding that of ordinary shinobi. Ruthless and inventive in their tactics, they posed a serious threat. Yet, even with his chakra reserves running low and his Mangekyo Sharingan unopened, Nathan felt confident. He believed he could defeat all three in a 1 versus 3, if only he could stretch the fight out long enough. Casting a casual glance toward his summoned beast, slouched like a giant sloth atop a distant tree, Nathan activated his telepathic mind transmission technique. Silently, he sent a thought to his shadow clone on the main battlefield. "Come join me." Nathan's shadow clone seized a gap in the fight, slipped away, and dashed toward the forest at top speed. Following Nathan's orders, the clone remained partially intangible, touching down silently beneath the towering canopy. It inched forward, scanning for its target. At first, the summoned creature was all but invisible. It melded seamlessly with the ancient tree behind it, Its bark-like hide and near-absent life force made it impossible to spot without locking onto its aura first. Clearly, this sloth-like beast was bred for stealth and surveillance. Nathan silently wondered where Danzo had unearthed such a perfect spy. Still muttering to himself, the clone readied its attack. With a ripple of chakra, it unleashed the flash body technique. In the blink of an eye, it materialized beside the hidden sloth. A chill gleam flared across the clone's long blade as it swung in one swift arc, intending to bisect its prey before it even knew what hit it. But instead of blood and flesh, the knife met nothing more than hard, splintering bark. 2 rough shards fell to the forest floor, and the sloth itself had vanished. All that remained was the broken shell of its disguise, and a faint echo of the beast's elusive presence. Nathan's shadow clone only caught a fading afterimage before it vanished. Seated on a gnarled bough some distance away, the real Nathan, locked in combat with 3 root operatives, had the clearer view, thanks to his Byakugan-enhanced vision. At first, the summoned sloth had no idea the clone was there, but as the duplicate closed to within a meter, it reacted in an instant. A substitution jutsu so swift that even Nathan's enhanced Isig, HT, could barely track it, swapped the creature's place with a piece of bark beneath its claws. In the fraction of a heartbeat that followed, it erupted into a summoning jutsu and simply disappeared. Nathan felt a wave of astonishment. In his previous life, that sloth-like summoning had seemed sluggish at best. Now, confronted with danger, it displayed reflexes worthy of an elite shinobi. The power of its reaction stunned him. He hadn't expected such speed from a lazy-looking beast. Still, Nathan had sent out his shadow clone mainly as a test. Though he hadn't struck it down, he'd forced the summon to abandon its post, clearing the path for him to bring his full strength to bear. That, at least, was progress. With the sloth gone and the root ninjas distracted by their missing ally, Nathan prepared to end this fight on his own terms. Nathan's gaze flicked to the 3 root operatives standing before him. At that moment, the ninja proficient in water escape ninjutsu suddenly turned, his eyes fixed on the spot where the sloth had vanished, and there, shimmering into view, was Nathan's shadow clone. The other 2 agents noticed their comrade's reaction, followed his line of sight, and likewise spotted the duplicate. Realizing they'd been flanked, the trio exchanged quick, tense looks. Then they made their decision: retreat. Not out of cowardice, but out of cold calculation. They had no wish to die pointlessly. Earlier, they might have sacrificed themselves just to test Nathan's abilities and provide the organization with fresh data. But now their summoned beasts, their eyes and ears were gone, and without any further intelligence value, the battle held no advantage. It was far wiser to fall back, preserve their bodies, and await the next orders. Besides, they'd already confirmed one critical fact. The 3 of them simply couldn't overpower Nathan. Had the odds been otherwise, they would have fought to the death. Instead, with a swift signal, they melted into the shadows, crafting their escape under the cover of swirling mist and rustling leaves. Nathan knew that if they wanted to leave, they'd need his permission first. With Sloth no longer watching from a distance, he could unleash his full power on these intruders, and he wasn't about to let them slip away. Still, before going all out, he quietly activated his Byakugan and scanned the perimeter once more. Satisfied that no one else was lurking nearby, he shifted into his Mangekyo Sharingan. In an instant, the 3 Magatama marks in his eyes stretched outward, their tips converging on the central iris. The black pupil swelled until it occupied nearly a third of his eye, and then each Magatama's tail split into 2. 6 sinuous ebony lines radiated from the enlarged central dot at precise 60-degree angles. Nathan's Sharingan now burned with the intensity of a dark sun, mysterious, commanding, and filled with untold power. Nathan's words hung in the air. The root Jonin blinked, momentarily stunned, then his pupils snapped shut in shock. "Mangekyo?" he gasped. "You've awakened the Mangekyo Sharingan?" Even he, trained to remain impassive, could not hide his disbelief. A faint smile curled Nathan's lips. "You recognized it?" The Jonin turned away without answering and cried, "Scatter! Fall back!" In an instant, he performed the body flicker technique and vanished down the corridor. The 2 ninja accompanying him hesitated only a heartbeat before darting off in opposite directions. But it was already too late. Nathan had no intention of letting them escape with such precious intel. With a single step forward, he tapped into his chakra reserves and disappeared completely. The mission was over. No one would walk away today. Chapter 539, The Forest Encounter. Nathan pressed through the thicket, branches whipping past as he closed in on his quarry. Ahead, Viper, the root jonin, staggered, panic in his eyes as he fled deeper into the forest. With a swift motion, Nathan launched a volley of shuriken. The metal stars hissed through the air. Viper's ears twitched, and he darted aside just in time. Shoving aside a low-hanging branch, Viper forced himself onward until a sudden shadow overhead made him freeze. A lone figure dropped from the canopy, landing lightly on the forest floor only yards away. Staring into that familiar gaze, Viper whispered, "Uchiha Seimei?" His voice faltered as realization struck. "No, you're not the original." In a blur of motion, Viper formed hand seals and roared, "Shadow clone jutsu." A thick plume of smoke erupted, and the jonin split into 4 perfect copies. Before Nathan could react, one clone lunged at him with a kunai, while the other 3 darted off along different trails into the dense undergrowth. Nathan paused, watching the fleeing figures vanish. He shook his head briskly, dismissing any thought of pursuit. With the attacking clone already closing the distance, he dropped into a fighting stance, ready for the real battle to begin. Nathan knew his shadow clone was merely a decoy this time. The real fight would be handled by his true self, so there was no need to hold back. 15 minutes later, deep in the heart of the jungle, Viper slithered through the undergrowth, every muscle coiled for attack. Then he paused, sensing a presence he couldn't ignore. Looking up through the vines, he froze. There, perched on a thick branch above him, stood a lone figure. Eyes like black suns glinted in the dim light. Those were unmistakably the Mangekyo Sharingan. Viper's heart thudded. The true opponent had arrived. With scarcely a sound, Nathan dropped from the branch and landed before the snake. He folded his arms and met Viper's gaze with an unnervingly calm expression. "Your turn," he said softly, as offhandedly as 2 strangers exchanging greetings on a train platform. But to Viper, the words carried a chill. He trembled, every instinct screaming that danger was imminent. Nathan's tone was devoid of threat or deception, yet Viper felt as though he stood at the edge of a precipice, unable to tear his eyes away. The moment of reckoning had come. Nathan faced a root special jonin, renowned for his sonic ninjutsu, and instinctively tried to mirror the attack with his Mangekyo Sharingan. As he'd expected, however, the technique slipped through his grasp. The Sharingan's copying ability has hard limits. It can't replicate jutsu that draw on elemental chakra natures the wielder doesn't possess, nor can it duplicate more exotic arts like sound-based techniques. Sonic ninjutsu, of course, falls squarely into that forbidden category, so Nathan's effort failed. Although the sonic jonin had proven too much of a challenge, Nathan still came away with a valuable prize. Part of the reason it had taken so long to track down this shinobi was the enemy's own cunning. After all, Viper's concealment tactics were notoriously tricky, but an even larger factor was that Nathan stopped en route to siphon chakra from another root operative, this one a wind release specialist. While temporarily incapacitated, the jonin had no choice but to relinquish several potent jutsu to Nathan's Sharingan. By the time Nathan moved on, he had mastered a handful of high-level techniques. The most useful among them was a B-rank wind release, Vacuum Jade, which fires compressed vacuum bullets capable of piercing the toughest defenses. Armed with these new abilities, Nathan pressed forward, confident that each step now brought him closer to outmaneuvering Viper and completing his mission. Nathan examined the details of Wind Release, Vacuum Blade, an ingenious C-rank jutsu that imbues any ninja tool with a razor-sharp edge. In the past, he'd relied on sheer volume of wind nature chakra to sharpen his long knife, boosting its penetration and deadliness. Now with this technique, he could exploit the air itself, carving vacuum slices around his blade for far greater cutting power. Though classified as only C-rank, in Nathan's eyes it was extraordinarily practical. Once he mastered it thoroughly, every strike would carry that extra, invisible slicing force. He couldn't wait to put it to the test. Beyond that, Nathan had also outwitted the limitations of his usual repertoire by copying an unfamiliar wind-style jutsu. From the feel of its chakra signature, he judged it to be a solid B-rank technique. In execution, it conjured a churning tornado that trapped its target at its core. Inside the whirlwind, countless razor-fine wind blades spun relentlessly, shredding its victim until there wasn't even a scrap of bone left. Witnessing the jutsu's effect in his mind's eye was like watching someone swallowed whole by a living storm. Absolutely terrifying. With both these new wind releases at his disposal, Nathan felt his combat potential soaring to unprecedented heights. Nathan dubbed the technique Wind Escape, Wind Bite. In just a few exchanges, the root jonin he had hunted down lay gravely wounded. Cornered and seeing no hope of retreat, the jonin unleashed a desperate final jutsu, determined to die alongside Nathan. But before his spell could reach its climax, Nathan activated his celestial mastery. Through its veil he watched, horrified, as hundreds of ethereal blades tore the jonin limb from limb. Even now, recalling that massacre made Nathan's stomach churn. There had been nothing he could do. He'd been too close when the jutsu struck. Though celestial mastery shielded him from all outside effects, it couldn't shield his mind from the grisly vision. Shaking off the nausea, he forced himself to focus. The instant he touched down, he sprinted toward the coiled viper. In that moment, the snake's survival instinct spiked to a fever pitch. Nathan's murderous aura blazed like a torch, leaving no doubt of his intent. The viper couldn't afford to turn its back, nor could it wait for Nathan to strike. It had to seize the initiative, or face certain defeat. Without a moment's hesitation, Nathan squared off against the viper. Metal rang against metal as their blades met in rapid succession, clang, 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 echoing across the training ground. In under 10 exchanges, the viper still hadn't lost ground, yet a growing unease churned in his gut. He'd never once met Nathan's gaze. From the first clash to the present, he'd fought purely on instinct and an acute awareness of his surroundings, and his instincts were screaming. But instinct, as keen as it might be, was no match for raw, overwhelming strength. In a heartbeat, Nathan vanished from the viper's view. Before he could even register the absence, a cold flash of steel streaked toward his right arm. What? The viper barely twisted sideways, trying to evade the strike, but Nathan's blade found its mark, slicing a shallow wound across his forearm. Staggering back in shock, the viper stared down at the thin line of blood, realization dawning that this fight was far from over, and that he might already be outmatched. Stab! The sickening sound of steel ripping through flesh echoed in the night. Nathan's kunai bit into Viper's right arm, tearing away a chunk of muscle and skin until bone gleamed white. With a howl of pain, Viper dropped his blade, which clattered to the ground. Through gritted teeth, he yanked another kunai from his belt with his left hand and swung it in a reverse throw aimed straight for Nathan's carotid artery. But Nathan had already vanished. The blade sliced only air. Viper's heart thundered in his chest as he snatched back the fallen weapon and braced himself, but he barely had time to raise his guard. In a heartbeat, Nathan reappeared directly in front of him, so close that Viper could see the crimson swirl of 2 Mangekyo Sharingan reflections in his eyes. "No," Viper whispered, panic tightening his throat. He slammed his eyes shut, desperate to block out what was coming, but Nathan gave him no chance. Soon as he appeared, Nathan's voice cut through the darkness. Illumination Sharingan. With that single command, an inescapable illusion wrapped around Viper's mind. Nathan's Mangekyo Sharingan flared to life, the world around him rippling as he cast the illusion. Even a seasoned root jonin like Viper could not withstand its power. In an instant, Viper's mind was ensnared, and his body went rigid. Nathan exhaled, watching the frozen figure before him. Relief washed over his features. At last, we've caught him. He could have ended Viper's life in a heartbeat. Few knew how lethal Nathan's Heaven's Control truly was. But Nathan had other concerns. He still didn't know who among his team was the mole. Until that traitor was unmasked, he dared not rest easy. Viper, now their sole surviving root operative, held the answers he needed. Nathan's thoughts flicked back to the 2 jonin who had fallen before him. The wind release specialist had perished in his own technique. He had refused to die alone and activated an airborne vortex in a final desperate gambit, only to be consumed by the very winds he commanded. The sound release expert's fate had been no different. His sonic assault backfired, leaving him fractured and broken. Viper would be no exception. But for now, Nathan was content to let the illusion do its work. He would extract every secret Viper carried, every fragment of intelligence, before delivering judgment. Only then could Nathan eliminate the mole and secure his position, and only then would he allow himself a moment's peace. Chapter 12. The Self-Destruction and the Hidden Truth. Nathan crouched in the dim light of the abandoned dojo, recalling what had happened to the other two Root operatives. Their bodies lay smoldering outside, victims of betrayal and ruthless efficiency. Now, before him, lay the third spy, codenamed Viper, motionless on the wooden floor. Earlier that night, an enemy agent had seized the chance to study Viper's signature ninjutsu firsthand. He believed he could copy the technique and gain leverage, only to discover he was hopelessly outmatched. Fearing capture and the exposure of vital secrets, the spy had made a final, desperate decision: self-destruction. In an instant, his body had erupted in a silent flash, scattering ash and secrets alike. Viper remained intact, the lone survivor, and the key to every answer Nathan needed. "Don't disappoint me," Nathan whispered, more to himself than to the motionless figure before him. He settled cross-legged and extended his hands over Viper's prone form, weaving a subtle series of seals in the air. The world around him rippled, then folded in on itself as the illusion took shape. Walls burned away, revealing hidden chambers stacked with forbidden scrolls. Dusty tomes spilled cipher codes. Shadowy corridors hinted at supply routes and clandestine meeting places. Inside this mind-forged labyrinth, Nathan moved like a scholar in a vast library, plucking every fragment of intelligence he required. He committed enemy cipher keys to memory, traced the path of hidden armories, and cataloged the unique hand seals that governed each deadly trap. At last, he gathered the final shard of information and released the illusion. Reality snapped back into place with a low hum. Viper stirred, blinking against the sudden return of moonlight that filtered through cracked shoji screens. Nathan rose, tucking invisible data deep within his mind. He offered Viper a curt nod. No words were necessary. The mission was a success. Tonight's sacrifice would not be in vain. With this new intelligence, the Council would see the truth, and Nathan would ensure they did not underestimate him again. Chapter 540, Return. It was him? Minutes later, Nathan's eyelids fluttered open as he murmured the words. Viper hadn't disappointed him. As the mission leader, Viper knew every operative's true identity, including the mole hidden in their ranks. What truly surprised Nathan, however, was that this infiltrator wasn't even a product of the Root organization's training. Yet Danzo held total sway over him through blackmail. When Nathan reflected on it, the truth became clear. Most Root operatives lacked the one quality a spy absolutely must have: humanity. A successful spy needs impeccable tradecraft, sure, but more than that, he needs the ability to adapt, to read people, and to blend in seamlessly. Without those social instincts, you can't lurk unnoticed or extract valuable intelligence. Root agents, by contrast, study human behavior from textbooks and still can't carry on a basic conversation. How could they ever succeed in the field? Nathan's mind flicked back to the memory of Danzo strong-arming Yakushi Nono and Kabuto into overseas undercover assignments, proof positive that these so-called spies were nothing of the sort. In Danzo's hands, they were little more than pawns, and a disastrous cover at that. Nathan studied the two figures before him. They were undeniably skilled, but if Root truly trusted them, Danzo wouldn't have dispatched agents who bore personal grudges. Shaking his head, Nathan put the thought aside and sprang into action. He formed the seals for his chakra absorption technique, channeling his will to siphon Viper's chakra dry. Before she could react, he unleashed a razor-sharp chakra scalpel that sliced through her neck. With a heavy thud, Viper's body hit the ground. Nathan crouched for a moment to confirm her death. Then, he turned his attention back to the heart of the conflict. His next task: eliminate every trace of opposition. Viper might not have been an official member of Root, and perhaps she'd been coerced, but coercion or no, she'd made her choice. In Nathan's eyes, responsibility could never be absolved by circumstance alone. He knelt beside her still form, arranged his fingers into the familiar sequence of seals, and called upon his fire style, Flame Grasp. A sphere of roaring flames blossomed in his palm, engulfing Viper's body in an instant. The fire roared, consuming everything it touched, until only ash remained. Sizzle! The sharp hiss of burning oil pierced the night. In a matter of seconds, the Viper's body had been reduced to ash. A sudden gust of wind scattered the remnants until nothing remained. Nathan offered a satisfied nod. He'd dispatched those last traps the same way he'd dealt with the others. Once he'd confirmed there were no hidden enemies nearby, Nathan didn't linger. He raised his hands and formed the hand seals for his ninjutsu. Wind style, wings of wind. In an instant, pale blue chakra wings unfurled from his back. With a powerful beat of those wings, he soared toward the main battlefield. Over 40 minutes had passed since the fighting began, and more than half an hour since he'd sent his report to Sano Nobuhisa. By now, reinforcements should be close. Nathan had to get back quickly. If the Kirigakure operatives realized something was wrong and slipped away, the mission would be ruined. He wasn't keeping these mist ninjas captive for sport. He needed to expose the traitor among them. And with the battlefield in chaos, there was no better moment to strike. Nathan knew he couldn't let this chance slip away. If he did, tracking down the mist ninjas later would demand far more time and effort, far more than he wanted to waste. He needed to confront them before they disappeared beyond reach. With that resolve, he activated his chakra feather garment mid-air, the silky, feather-like cloak enveloping his entire body in a protective aura. Immediately, he poured chakra into his legs and wings, skyrocketing to top speed. He'd only been a short distance from the main battlefield, but after the snake's rampage, nearly 15 minutes of chaos, the gap between them had grown alarmingly wide. Still, Nathan's enhanced flight cut that distance in an instant. Barely a dozen seconds later, he came to a sudden stop. Through his Byakugan, he scanned the forest canopy a few hundred meters ahead and spotted a small squad moving cautiously beneath the trees. 4 figures, each cloaked in the misty gray garb of Kirigakure's shinobi. By their chakra signatures, one was clearly a special jonin, their leader, and the other 3 were Chunin operatives. They advanced with measured steps, alert to any sign of trouble. Their path followed the same rugged trail Viper had taken in her desperate bid for freedom, a path Nathan now intended to block. Taking a steadying breath, he prepared himself. The ambush would begin the moment they rounded the next bend. Nathan reviewed Viper's briefing one more time. The only support these strangers had was a handful of mist shinobi assigned to this mission. No formal alliance, no backup. It was obvious they'd spotted the earlier skirmish and were rushing in to investigate. Better to be cautious, he decided. He couldn't act under his own name. For all he knew, he had no official warrant to kill them yet, even as a captain, so he'd borrow their cover. Posing as one of Kirigakure's ninja would be far simpler. Within moments, Nathan dropped in from above, adopting the dusky blue garb and lacquered mask of a mist operative. The 4 shinobi on the ground barely registered his arrival before he unleashed his technique. Fire style, great fireball technique, he intoned. Instantly, a gigantic orb of scorching flame coalesced in front of him, its radiance warping the air. With a forceful thrust, he launched it downward. "This is bad! Watch out!" one mist ninja shouted, eyes widening. "Retreat! Fall back now!" cried another. "Take cover! Move!" the third warned, panic in his voice. Caught off guard by the blazing assault, all 4 scrambled for safety. They scattered in different directions, desperately weaving through the trees to escape the inferno's path. Floating above them, Nathan watched their frantic retreat. As the last of the fireball's embers died away, he allowed himself a faint, satisfied nod. Since he first unleashed the fire-style, great fireball technique at Eugenport, Nathan had been hooked. Not for its showiness, but for its sheer simplicity and speed. For a ninja who believed in defeating 10 opponents with a single blow, it was the perfect style. Of course, drawbacks existed. The jutsu devoured chakra at an alarming rate, far more than an ordinary shinobi could muster. Even Nathan felt the strain if he used it too often. Fortunately, his mastery of the chakra absorption technique let him refill his reserves almost instantly. So whenever the opportunity arose, he never hesitated. Lost in thought, Nathan formed the seals with practiced ease and exhaled a massive sphere of fire toward his foes. The moment it struck the ground, an earth-shattering boom echoed through the clearing. The fireball burst apart, showering embers and flame in all directions. Trees ignited like torches, and within seconds the 100-meter radius was engulfed in an inferno. Painful screams cut through the roar of the blaze. Two missed shinobi, trapped too close to the blast, had been hurled off their feet by the shockwave. Before they could find footing, the roaring flames consumed them, their cries swallowed by the heat and smoke. Nathan watched coldly as the firestorm raged on, another decisive victory earned through precision, power, and the ruthless efficiency he prized above all else. They were already dead. Even the two who'd managed to flee were coated in fine dust, their garments scorched through in wide swaths, hacking and spluttering with every breath. Yet neither took their eyes off their surroundings, especially the sky. Suddenly, the Kirigakure elite jonin stiffened, his pupils shrinking to pinpricks as he searched the heavens for a threat that wasn't there. A cold panic shot through him, and he instinctively leaped backward. In the next instant, a flash of steel whistled past, teeth severing the air and his former position clean in two. Huh? Nathan's voice was almost casual as he watched the jonin evade that first strike. He didn't chase the illusion, though. Instead, a faint green glow rippled across his form as he activated his flash sword technique. In the blink of an eye, he was at the elder shinobi's side again. The white blade arced down. This time, the Kirigakure veteran couldn't dodge in time. Nathan's strike bit through flesh and bone, shearing off half the man's arm. Nathan's blade flashed again, slicing through flesh until white bone gleamed and blood sprayed across the courtyard. Special Jonin Akihinosuke's face went deathly pale, cold sweat beading on his forehead, but there was no time to recover. Nathan's green-lit form blurred as he unleashed the instant sword technique a second time. Akihara was caught entirely off guard. Swish! The sickening sound of steel parting flesh echoed through the night. Akihara somersaulted backward, narrowly avoiding the strike, but the cut along his side left him reeling with pain. Not far off, a Kirigakure Chunin who had escaped the swirling inferno lunged forward to assist. Yet before he could close the gap, Nathan exploited a fleeting distraction. With uncanny speed, he invoked the illusion sword technique, sending a phantom blade slashing across the Chunin's throat. The man crumpled instantly, crimson staining his tunic. Ha! Nathan's breathy laugh pierced the chaos. A crushing weight filled the air. Akihara clutched at the wound in his throat, his eyes widening in shock and disbelief. He met Nathan's gaze, fierce unwillingness burning in his stare. But in that moment, resistance amounted to little more than defiance against fate. In the end, the man crumpled to the ground, utterly defeated, and accepted his fate. Nathan had expected nothing less. His opponent's strength was no match for his own, and the devastating sneak attack he'd launched at the outset had already secured him an overwhelming advantage. From the very first strike, the outcome of this brief battle had been all but certain.